Pride is actually the opposite of love. Love is about others, pride is about self. And so if we really want to be about loving others, we ought to have a month called Humility Month rather than Pride Month.
I'm wearing a man pun today, if you can't see it. I'm trying something new out. Please don't roast me too hard in the comments if I look like a frizz demon. My hair was all up in my eyes, and Jen was like, this'll help, and I thought it looked kind of cool. I'm hoping it looks cool on camera, but like I said, don't roast me too hard if I look goofy. Also, I want to give a quick shout out to a fan. Recently, Jen and I got to go see some independent wrestling in St. Louis, and a fan, lovely fan by the name of Robin, made this bracelet for us. She saw us at the event and whipped these up over the course of one night. We went to 2 different shows. So thank you so much, Robin. I hope you're watching this, and I hope you enjoy your shout out. We love the bracelet. It hangs over my desk, and it keeps me motivated to keep doing what I do and researching these topics. Hello, everybody, and welcome back for another episode of Fundy Fridays. If you're new around these parts, my wife, the Reverend Jen, and I, well, on this channel, we talk about stuff like American conservative politics, evangelical Christianity, pop culture, gay stuff, and the way all those things seem to just bump into each other like bestsellers, beloved children's books, and bad manga all clattering around at the bottom of the return bin. And today, along those lines, we have a topic on the channel that is very near and dear to my heart personally. You may have seen in the news, but recently we saw one of the absolute worst things about the United States. Former child sitcom star and current insufferable has-been Kirk Cameron attacking one of the absolute best things about the United States, its public library system. As a deeply burnt-out American for whom libraries are one of the few things that inspire actual patriotism in me, this is just something I cannot abide. And sadly, if you can believe it, it turns out things can get even worse than Kirk Cameron. See, while researching this episode, I discovered a much deeper and broader wave of anti-library sentiment sweeping this country than I had even realized before I started. While sure, I was going into this kind of understanding that all of our libraries in this country are currently under attack by conservatives and their anti-American, pro-censorship views, I know I wasn't fully aware of just how bad this problem had gotten, and I'm eager to let as many people know about it as I possibly can. But through all of that, I also managed to discover the history of the modern, tax-supported American public library. And honestly, it's basically the story of everything that's ever made this country good or worth fighting for. The library exists as a beacon of reason, justice, and opportunity in an ever-increasingly bleak American capitalist hellscape. The library is life, liberty, and the pursuit of happiness all rolled into one, and we need to defend it as such. And if we don't take a stand sooner rather than later, we could lose that time-honored and hard-earned American public library as we know it to some very bad actors and their puritanical pursuits. And as soon as we see exactly how important these islands of knowledge are to the very fabric of our society, well, I think that's gonna be something none of us will be able to tolerate. Trust me, I'm gonna dig in a little more, but we don't want to lose society's last bastion of free, accessible public entertainment for all. I mean, think about it. Everything else is pure commercial drivel, right? Just made and generated for a profit. Oh yeah, and that reminds me. Today's video is brought to you by Surfshark VPN. I'd like to take a moment and thank the sponsor for today's video, Surfshark VPN, and let all of you know that you can go to surfshark.deal/fundyfridays right now and get 3 free months with a new Surfshark subscription. Surfshark is kind of like a library card for all of your internet-connected devices, offering a world of features and entertainment at a low cost. For example, Surfshark's IP and DNS leak protection ensures that no one can see where you're connecting to the internet from, or track your online activity, even when you're accessing the internet from glorious taxpayer-funded public library Wi-Fi. Not to mention, Surfshark offers compatible apps for basically any device you could possibly use at the library. They ensure that your laptop is protected on those long study days, and also ensure your phone is protected for those evenings watching YouTube on that comfy couch by the graphic novels. And speaking of which, Surfshark also allows you to access the world's 15 largest streaming libraries, including those in the United States and Japan. It's really not too surprising though, seeing as Surfshark was the first ever VPN service to have servers in over 100 countries. And like the library, Surfshark tries their hardest to save you money on their incredible service. They allow you to connect all your household devices on just one account and even offer a 30-day money-back guarantee. So once again, thank you so much to Surfshark for sponsoring this video, and I want to remind you that you can go to surfshark.deal/fundyfridays right now to get 3 free months with a new Surfshark subscription. And now, back to the video. But getting back to the story for today, let's go ahead and check in with old Kirk the Jerk Cameron and see exactly what his beef is with our American libraries. So, what exactly is your problem, dude?
She wanted to sleep with me and I didn't do it. I'm probably gay. Are you happy now?
Okay, that wasn't what I asked you at all, although if you were gay, I would support you, Kirk. Tell you what, instead of asking him, let's just do chapter cards from here on out. How about that? All jokes aside, though, I'm kind of assuming a lot of you are already familiar with Kirk Cameron, at least in some capacity, particularly since he's come up on Fundy Fridays a couple of times already. Jen's previous video covering Kirk and his equally washed-up sister Candace is the definitive starting point, in my opinion, though, if you're looking for the complete Cam-Fam catastrophe. But in the meantime, here's the short version you'll need for today. Kirk Cameron is primarily an actor, best known for his time as the breakout star and teen heartthrob of 80s family sitcom Growing Pains. You don't hear a lot about Growing Pains anymore because it was the forgettable garbage tier schlock TV that only worked in the era of cheap Coke and Reaganomics, but all the same, it is still the lion's share of Kirk Cameron's fame and fortune. Now, towards the end of his teenage years, Kirk would convert to Christianity after attending an evangelical church with some unnamed person from the show, who I suspect doesn't want to be blamed for what Kirk turned into. Because see, this wasn't your run-of-the-mill conversion to Christianity either, oh no. Kirk Cameron is legendary for the atomic levels of smug self-righteousness he seemed to exude upon finding Christ. From casting judgment on his former co-stars to casting judgment on basically everyone else, it seems that no one was safe from Kirk's new God-honoring ego.
So Mario, by your own admission, you're a lying thief and an adulterer at heart.
Hey, what do you think about Black Sabbath and Hitler?
Okay, let me talk about that in a minute. Let me finish this first, okay?
And speaking of, you know Jen wouldn't have let me put this episode out at all unless I played this clip from Way of the Master, specifically Ray Comfort's infamous atheist nightmare demonstration wherein he tries to prove evolution false by pointing out all the ways that bananas are God's perfect creation.
Hold this, Kirk. Behold the atheist's nightmare. Now, if you study a well-made banana, you'll find on the far side there are 3 ridges. On the close side, 2 ridges. If you get your hand ready to grip a banana, you'll find on the far side there are 3 grooves, on the close side 2 grooves. The banana and the hand are perfectly made one for the other. You'll find the maker of the banana, Almighty God, has made it with a non-slip surface. It has outward indicators of inward contents: green, too early; yellow, just right; black, too late. Now, if you go to the top of the banana, you'll find, as with the soda can makers, they placed a tab at the top, so God has placed a tab at the top. When you pull the tab, the contents don't squirt in your face. You'll find the wrapper, which is biodegradable, has perforations. Notice how gracefully it sits over the human hand. Notice it has a point at the top for ease of entry. It's just the right shape for the human mouth. It's chewy, easy to digest, and it's even curved toward the face to make the whole process so much easier. Seriously, Kirk, the whole of creation testifies to the genius of God's creative hand.
It absolutely does.
By the time Growing Pains ended in 1992, his star was already burning out at an alarming rate. And becoming a Jesus jerk in notoriously liberal, sinful Hollywood, well, that certainly didn't help the matter. Kirk's attempts at jumping to the silver screen failed, as did his attempts at his own TV show. And by the end of the decade, he had been relegated to TV movies, Growing Pains reunions, and a guest appearance on Touched by an Angel. Which, let me tell you by the way, was much harder to find online than you might have expected, especially for someone like me who just wanted a clip so he could talk over it. But you know, enjoy this, because you're probably some of the only people to have actually seen it in the last 20 to 30 years.
Graham says I'm like a turtle. I curl up in my shell and I'm safe, but I never get anywhere.
So what is an underappreciated former teen star who clearly is better and more pious than everyone else to do when no one wants to cast him in any big-time projects since he won't stop lecturing them about fornication? Well, he should make Jesus movies, of course! Yes, starting in the early 2000s, Kirk would make a bold move into the world of Christian-themed entertainment media, most notably starring in the first film adaptation of legendary Christian-themed thriller novel Left Behind. And even by the standards of other Christian actors in Hollywood, Kirk was known for being exceptionally devout, exceptionally conservative, and exceptionally demanding. One good example he would become particularly known for was his refusal to kiss anyone on screen except for his own wife, Chelsea Noble, oftentimes requesting that she be haphazardly subbed into kissing scenes just to make sure he doesn't break his covenant with God. Fun fact, Chelsea is herself another B-list has-been, most famous for starring in a single 1997 episode of Seinfeld in which she pined after George Costanza for 22 minutes. Which, now that I'm thinking about it, kind of makes sense and probably led to that whole no kissing other people on camera thing since, no man wants to compete with Jason Alexander. Following the unusual success of Kirk's 2008 Christian romance film Fireproof, Kirk's career would then seem to slowly start to decline under the weight of his own intense beliefs and personality. No movie he's done since has performed to the level that Fireproof did, at least from what I could tell. And his most notable recent appearance seems to, and I'm not kidding about this, be about 6 seconds on the show Fuller House.
I'm Kirk Cameron!
While Kirk does still unfortunately make movies, he has now branched into things like YouTube, podcasting, and children's literature, although we will get to that one in a moment. Furthermore, in recent years, Kirk has positioned himself as kind of a Christian conservative pundit, albeit one of relatively little fanfare. His recent film work has been focused more on things like social documentaries covering American homeschooling or Christian identity in the United States, that type of stuff. The kind of stuff that clearly only appeals to people with his own extreme worldview. Likewise, his TBN show Takeaways is a nothing special conservative talk program where Kirk and whichever evangelical buddy he brings along that week either discuss some half-baked theology or complain about how liberal everything is now. I'd laugh off the whole stupid program, except this man somehow managed to get 23 solid minutes with my own Senator Josh Hawley, while neither I nor any other tax-paying Missourian seemed to be able to get the man to so much as return an email. And see, that's the thing. Despite his fully crackpot beliefs and the generally low quality of his social commentary, Kirk has this remarkable ability to actually get shit done? Or at least to be in the proximity of shit getting done, larger social movements that he can kind of retroactively take some credit for on the back end. We can see it as far back as March of 2016, when Kirk was already showing support for Donald Trump at a time where even the few other Hollywood conservatives were mostly just hemming and hawing about more moderate options. And while I doubt Kirk's support was a super big deal for Trump, we have to remember he was trying to bolster his clout with evangelicals at the time, so it wasn't completely insignificant. And once again in 2020, Kirk was able to secure himself a spot in the headlines by taking a seat on the coattails of that year's conservative cause du jour, which just so happened at the time to be COVID lockdowns. In the face of California's nation-leading COVID spikes in December 2020, Kirk decided that he'd had enough of all that protecting the health of our most vulnerable neighbors nonsense and began organizing maskless outdoor Christmas caroling events.
There they are, hundreds of carolers with not a mask in sight, singing their hearts out. They were there to protest the state of California's lockdown orders. And look, that's Growing Pains star Kirk Cameron.
And let's do this all through the Christmas and New Year's season.
The prominent evangelical Christian promoted the event on Instagram.
I'm so excited. So many friends, so much of our community is gathered ready to sing at the top of our voices right next to the mall. We hope you can join us. We're going to be celebrating our God-given liberties, our constitutionally protected rights at this time at Christmas to sing Christmas songs.
So yeah, Kirk probably got a few people killed with this little stunt of his, but hey, conservative fame demands sacrifice even if you're not the one sacrificing. Kirk still got himself onto Fox News a handful of times over this, and I'm sure he made some money off of it somehow, so I can only imagine that to at least Kirk himself, this whole caroling thing was a rousing success. And it is all of that which leads me into our main story today. Because now it seems like this shrewd yet woefully unlikable little clout goblin has found his newest conservative cause celeb to attach himself to, in the form of the American Public Library. Now, before we dive too deep into the stacks, I wanted to let all of you know that for today's episode, we actually have a special guest. See, I knew it was going to get a little rough today, so I went ahead and called in a Fundy Fridays favor to enlist the help of someone so pleasant and knowledgeable that she might actually be able to help us counter all of the unpleasant, unknowledgeable people we're about to be dealing with. Let's go ahead and meet her now. We have here with us Dakota Hommes, former employee of my own Daniel Boone Regional Library where I live. And I just wanted to talk to her a little bit as a former library employee. So thank you so much, Dakota, for taking the time to sit down with me.
Thank you for having me.
I felt like this episode would benefit from having someone with real, actual working library experience, particularly someone who had worked in a frontline capacity serving patrons of the library. I also felt like it would be really good to speak to an employee of a threatened library, located in a place where libraries are currently at the center of controversy in some regard. Dakota actually meets both of these qualifications, having been an employee of my own local Daniel Boone Regional Library chain here in central Missouri. We'll get to it a bit later on, but for some time now, Missouri's libraries have been under direct attack from our own Secretary of State and human fungal infection, Jay Ashcroft. And moving into more things that they like to do, particularly our garbage Secretary of State, Jay Ashcroft, is their attempt. Oh, everybody loves the Ashcrofts. They haven't been ruining. My grandparents hated the Ashcrofts. Now, like I said, we'll cover that all later on, but in the meantime, I just wanted to demonstrate that Dakota has experience both as a frontline library employee and as a library employee in a library that's been threatened by political forces. What's more, Dakota played an active frontline role in the organization and development of the Daniel Boone Regional Library's first ever employee labor union, giving her even more unique perspective into the world of libraries and making her truly the perfect person to help out with today's episode. So you were a leader in the movement to actually unionize the Daniel Boone library system, which, first of all, that went through. Congratulations. And second of all, I wanted to talk to you a little bit about the library's role specifically in that unionization. How do you feel the library's position as kind of a place of, education and neutrality and social equity, things like that? How do you feel, if at all, that played into your all's unionization efforts?
It was a huge part of it. The conversations we were having at the beginning were about what libraries mean to us, what libraries stand for as a place where you can access information and entertainment and so many other services for free. And that not really lining up with the workplace, which wasn't paying us or giving us the health insurance that we needed, and was not really being transparent about how some decisions were being made that impacted our lives. So we wanted to bring those things closer together, and forming a union was the way for us to do that. As we're talking about the many different services that libraries offer, this is kind of a newer thing in the history of libraries, but libraries are being asked to do a lot also. Like, we love all the amazing things libraries do, and it is a lot of social services that are sort of being handed to libraries. There's a lot of things libraries are being asked to do, and the workplace protections for us were not keeping up with those responsibilities increasing. So that was really the need for us to unionize, and why I would encourage other libraries, especially in Missouri and the Midwest, to unionize as well, because we know that we need those kind of protections at work.
Anyway, we'll be hearing from Dakota later on and throughout the episode as kind of our informal library expert for today. She's a fantastic TikToker, a longtime Gemini, and a close personal friend of the channel, and we cannot thank her enough for taking time to sit down and share her experiences with us today. So thank you, Dakota. But speaking of those unpleasant others I mentioned earlier, it's time to get back to the story of Kirk Cameron and his great epic quest to end the scourge of American literacy, I guess. So, once again, we'll ask, what is Kirk Cameron's beef with the American Public Library? Well, it all starts with this seemingly innocuous little children's book right here. Sometime in 2021, Kirk Cameron linked up with Dr. Trent Talbot, former ophthalmologist and concerned Christian father. See, Dr. Trent was really concerned that there just wasn't enough conservative children's literature out there to meet the need of children and families like his. And so, to meet this need, Dr. Trent would shut down his ophthalmology practice and instead found Christian children's book publisher Brave Books. The newest thing coming to a scratched up, overcrowded evangelical homeschool table near you.
Are you confident that your children's foundational values are grounded in truth? I'm not. I'm Trent Talbot, founder of Brave Books. When my daughter was born, I realized I couldn't rely on the culture around me to teach my children good values. These values they need to work hard, care for the weak, to appreciate the freedom we adore in America. That's why we at Brave Books have written stories with timeless virtues for the next generation. These stories take place in our brave universe, where our heroes of Freedom Island are facing the same villainous ideologies that our children face in our culture today.
Now, longtime fans of Fundy Fridays may recall my coverage of the Tuttle Twins, a series of libertarian children's books with marketing nearly identical to that of Brave Books. Entertain your kids, steer them away from gay stuff, make kids think the fair tax is cool, you know how it goes. And for the unaffiliated, it might be surprising to learn that there's actually quite a few conservative choices out there when it comes to children's literature. So, what sets Brave Books apart from all the competition? Well, their most unique claim to fame is probably their subscription-based business model. We can hear a little bit more about that from an interview that Trent actually gave to Kirk on the aforementioned Takeaways show. Hey y'all, James in editing here. So it turns out Kirk and his little TBN buddies really like to use the copyright claim button, and nothing that he and Trent are talking about is worth me losing my money over, I'm sorry. So I'll just explain to you what they're talking about. Essentially, Brave Books has a model wherein they attempt to get parents to subscribe their child to the Brave Books system. And at that point, they are sent a book every month that is tailored to their age group. It also obviously teaches conservative values, and it sticks inside the larger Freedom Island universe that they have created. Trent goes on to say that they also have plans in place at Brave Books to start aging the books up with subscribed youth as they grow, essentially becoming a mainstay in the household for years and years and years. Now, admittedly, from a business perspective, I kind of see the vision. Get kids into the broader Freedom Island universe, keep them on a subscription for well over a decade by aging the books up with them as they go along, all while providing reinforcement of mom and dad's political views in order to ensure your position as a long-term mainstay of the household. And since you know these kinds of families aren't the type to run with only children, you've got the consistent shot to get multiple subscriptions for many individual households. Play your cards right, and this is basically a license to print money. Don't get me wrong, it's evil as all hell, but by the standards of capitalism, it's actually kind of genius. And it's not like this was Brave's only selling point either. The company seems to have absolutely roared out of the starting gate with slick production values and a strong marketing strategy. Just 3 years past its founding, and by my count, Brave Books already has over 40 titles to its name, and all inside that Freedom Island universe at that. Likewise, the brand has also made a name for itself by securing a buttload of conservative and Christian celebrity tie-ins as part of their brand. And I mean, they really went big on these partnerships here. These books were written by a modern all-star team of gross conservative pundits. Here's just a small sample of their lineup. Laura Trump, daughter-in-law of former President Donald Trump. Sean Spicer, former Dancing with the Stars contestant. General Michael Flynn, former National Security Advisor. Riley Gaines, whiny transphobic swimmer. Zuby, terrible conservative influencer. J.P. Sears, terrible conservative influencer. D.C. Drano, terrible conservative. You get the idea at this point. Like, it's so obvious these are written for the parents. Oh my God. But yes, among this illustrious roster is our boy Kirk Cameron, who, as we've already seen, would go on to pen his own Brave book for the company. As You Grow, at least per its official ISBN listing, was published on December 1st of 2022. And I find that particularly interesting since, in my research at least, it seems like Kirk's beef with the libraries would show up in the public consciousness exactly 1 week later on December 8th. That day, Kirk appeared with Tucker Carlson of Fox News to proclaim that he had been attempting to promote his book by way of library story readings, dubbed Brave Books Story Hours, and that he had somehow already been turned down by over 50 libraries.
So let's say you want to host a drag time story hour with 7-year-olds. You obviously can use your public library for that, but you can't read a book about God at a public library. And the actor Kirk Cameron just learned that. Dozens of public libraries refused to give him a slot to speak to kids about his new faith-based book called As You Grow. One Rhode Island library told him, quote, "We are a very queer-friendly library. Our messaging does not align." Okay, Kirk Cameron joins us tonight. Kirk, thanks so much for coming on. So they wouldn't let you read this book? This book was banned in libraries? How controversial is this book?
Well, it's a book that teaches biblical wisdom through the seasons of life to children and the value of growing the fruit of the Spirit, like love, joy, kindness, patience, gentleness, self-control. And I wanted to do a book reading at a public library, and I was denied by over 50 woke libraries.
Okay, well, I can't prove that he's done anything nefarious here. I just can't help but feel like 50 denials in 7 days, that's a lot, right? That's a lot. Like, that's a whole lot. It just seems pretty outlandish, right? And it seems to me, at least, that there's some pretty solid evidence to back up that concern as well. Now, bear in mind, everything I'm about to say is my opinion, and also, Kirk Cameron is not the mega celebrity he likes to believe he is, so the information about this story was never really comprehensive. Everything I found was kind of piecemeal. But all the same, I've done my best to pull together a timeline of Kirk's attempts to read his book at different libraries, and all of the resulting conflict that came out of that. And if you do all that, I think the story comes into focus a lot more clearly than if you just take Kirk's word on everything. And boy, would it have been very easy to just take Kirk's word on everything, given the sheer number of interviews he took over it. Just a week later, on December 15th, he'd be back to the interview circuit, this time with CBN.
But the book is actually at the center of a lot of headlines right now. You are at the center of a lot of headlines. You basically, and correct me if I'm wrong, Brave Books, the publisher, you guys reached out to numerous libraries, over 50 libraries around the country, because you wanted to go and read the book and share the book with the community, and nobody got back to you, or they said no. Is that accurate?
It's important to frame this, that we reached out to many libraries around the country with my book, which is about biblical wisdom and teaching children how to grow the fruit of the Spirit, which is love, joy, peace, patience, kindness, goodness, gentleness, and self-control.
Yeah, Kirk, and a partridge in a pear tree, I'm sure. But let's let him go on a little bit longer, because it's about to get interesting.
You would think that public libraries would be thrilled for a book that would teach these virtues to children. And we were denied by over 50 woke libraries that have hosted drag queen story hours.
All right, we're going to stop and detour a little bit here, because Kirk just kind of gave up the goat on this whole cockamamie scheme of his, or at least part of it, and I want to explore that in a little more detail now. See, there is an official inspiration for the Brave Books Story Hour in the form of Drag Story Hour. While there is a real original Drag Story Hour organization that is credited with first introducing the concept to the country in 2015, since that time, the whole idea of drag story hours has truly exploded in popularity, with events taking place both under the official Drag Story Hour banner and informal ones that are just set up by their own communities, taking place all across the country all the time anymore. Drag Story Hour is, as the name describes, performers in drag read children's storybooks and engage in fun family activities with children and their families, most commonly taking place at public libraries. These events are usually a low-cost good time for all involved, and a safe place for young children to engage with things like gender expression, self-esteem, and showing kindness to others. Now, that probably sounds like a completely harmless thing that should generate absolutely no controversy whatsoever. And that's because that's what it is. It is exactly that. Yet all the same, and as you probably expect now, these drag story hour performances have been a lightning rod for conservative controversy since the moment they first started taking place. Hell, Marjorie Taylor Greene was out protesting drag story hours in her own uniquely tragicamp way as far back as early 2019, before she even made it to Congress.
There's like 1,000 militant looking, I can't video them because they're all inside the door staring at me, but they're a bunch of like militant looking lesbians that look like they want to murder me because they don't like me. So here's what's happening. They're having drag queen story hours all in our county now. And where I live, Alpharetta, is honestly extremely conservative. There's 2 Christian churches across the street from this library and 2 Christian schools. This is very much against our community standards.
Do you know what's going on in there?
In there?
Yeah.
It's a drag queen story hour. Yeah, I was against it. Oh yeah, they're brainwashing our kids to believe that gender's whatever you want to believe with our tax dollars. This isn't about being homophobic or being against people's sexual choices. It's about what's happening to our children and the tax dollars that are being used to do it.
Part of all this vitriolic rage has to do with drag's history as a bawdy, adults-only affair primarily performed in nightclubs and bars. And yeah, for many decades now, drag shows have served as a place of counterculture and a haven for marginalized queer folk, with the rowdy humor and sentiments to match. And that type of drag, for the record, should be protected, preserved, and celebrated all on its own. And yes, it's true that some of today's drag queens are rotted and are best left to only the seediest of nightclubs, like these 2 miscreants here.
You know what the sad thing is? I hate kids. And it's really a bait and switch because I look like I look like I should be at the Boston Public Library reading to kids.
I think the funniest...
I'll go to the library to read to kids.
Yet in our modern age, where your mom has opinions on All Stars 6 and your grandma's nursing home is hosting a drag brunch on Thursday, it was only a matter of time before at least some of the drag queens adapted their act to an audience of all ages.
Disney's reboot of the beloved Little Mermaid was a case in point. Did anybody see that?
It came out on my birthday. It did?
Instead of admitting that Disney had managed to ruin a classic, defenders of the subpar remake, including its star, accused the public of racism.
See, even the pink one can change. Trust me, she's way less terrified than usual here. But seriously, the drag performers invited to these events are talented, savvy professionals who are more than capable of adapting to their audience and keeping things both appropriate and entertaining for all. They don't get gigs by being bad at their jobs. Furthermore, from what I've seen, drag story hour participants know they have to be as non-political and non-controversial as possible. Hell, it's why their events usually get official library endorsement, because they know how to be appropriate, play by the rules, and to stick to topics or activities that don't offend. Any negative attention can cost a library its entire drag story hour program, and potentially a lot more than that, and all of the performers know that. So yeah, case closed. Everyone can sit down and enjoy the show now, right? Well, of course not. See, we're at a point in our American history where, unfortunately for a large subset of our population, drag means gay and gay means obscene. And as such, in their minds, all drag must be kept away from all kids. Take, for example, these hauntingly cold takes from Fundy Friday's mainstays, Girl Defined, who missed the point about drag in, well, basically the same way they missed the point about everything else.
Drag queens. And the fact that it has become so mainstream, it is so popular, it is something that we're told children should be exposed to. It will give them sexual diversity, opportunity. You know, their young minds are so moldable and we want to shape them in the right way. In fact, something happened recently in our own backyard. We're from San Antonio, so not too far away, Dallas, Texas. This was in the news a lot, so you probably heard about it, but there was a big drag show, and it was literally titled Drag the Kids to Pride, a family-friendly drag show. That's how it was advertised, and basically they were saying this is the ultimate family-friendly drag show. Come, bring your family, bring your little kids. We're gonna have drag performers. in a nightclub, by the way. You know, there's going to be dancing, and they even said, in fact, we're going to have 5 spots open for kids to join the stage to dance with the drag performers, and it's going to be this wonderful family-friendly night. You know, let's go. And in fact, when I saw some articles and some videos about this event, there was a huge neon sign in the background that literally said, it's not going to lick itself. We don't need to give you any more, you know, information about that details. You can probably guess what that means in a nightclub like this.
Actually, Kristen, this would have been a really good time for you to provide more context and not let people guess what's going on, because I took the time to dig up footage from the event you're talking about, including that neon sign in the background. And one Google search allowed me to figure out that that sign is associated with, are you ready for it? Cauldron Ice Cream, a Dallas area ice cream chain that is popular with all ages. So don't get mad at the queens, get mad at the ice cream. Anyway, though, Bethy, you got anything weird and offensive to say before we get back to the main story?
We are not going to give into the delusion. This is not going to help all of the major mental breakdowns that are going on in our world and suicide. Like, this is not helping it by affirming that, 1, men can be women, or 2, men should dress up like women and put on fake breasts that are way oversized, massive rears, you know, like wear very skimpy clothing and dance around and twerk and do all this stuff. Like,
Thing is, though, this isn't all just pointless YouTube chatter. Some folks have really taken to the streets with this nonsense. Take a look at this clip covering an anti-drag story hour performance at the regional library in Petaluma, California, which comes to us from ABC News 7 Bay Area.
But this group of demonstrators disagree. They believe drag performers should not be reading to kids.
What I'm against is explicit sexuality, I don't care if it's gay or straight, being put upon young, innocent children.
I just feel like we're losing moral ground in our country. And this is not right to do this to children.
Yeesh. And bear in mind, that's in the San Francisco Bay Area. You can imagine how bad it is for all of us here in the flyover states. But moving back to Kirk Cameron, you can tell these drag story hour performances are his real nemesis in this whole Brave Books thing, given the fact that he just can't seem to keep these queens out of his mouth.
And I was denied by over 50 woke libraries that have hosted drag queen story hours. And we were denied by over 50 woke libraries that have hosted drag queen story hours. We've had quite a bit of opposition to it. In fact, we were denied by over 50 woke public libraries who would not allow me to have a public story reading of this book, even though they've already had drag queen story hour readings in those same libraries. And I wanted to have a book reading at a public library, and over 50 woke libraries denied my book, and at the same time they're hosting drag queen story hours. And so they're blocking people from coming to the library while simultaneously promoting things like drag queen story hours.
Remember, friends, once is an event, twice is a coincidence. But 5 times, that's fan behavior. Now, of course, all of us here are more than likely smart enough to pick up on Kirk's main problem with drag performers, namely how they challenge the rigid gender binaries and oligarchic dreams of social domination that he and many evangelicals hold so dear. But personally, I'm just fully convinced that Kirk is upset about how much better these drag performers are at engaging the youth than he is. Please, tell me which of these 2 individuals you think would be more effective at holding the interest of a crowd of buzzy, overwhelmed children. Would it be this lovely drag queen giving full song, dance, and beat while also dressed like the technicolor punk rock space princess of our collective daydreams?
A lizard, ooh. A camel. Awesome. Yes. A dinosaur.
Or would it be this milquetoast middle-aged white dude in tasteful brown suede, whose most engaging bit seems to be, I don't know, taking his glasses off and then putting them back on again?
Look at this guy right here. This really funny owl with a hat. I wonder where he's flying to. Where do you think he's going? He looks like he's delivering something. You think he's going south? Yeah, because it's winter time.
Nope, can't even pay attention to that to be polite. And I'm a grown man, mind you. Good luck to all those children in the audience, and thank God evangelical parents are well known for being so friendly towards their children and even-tempered in their punishments. But, regardless of his lack of showmanship, this performance from Kirk does prove that all this bad faith badgering of his must have worked at least at some point, and that he would finally end up making his way into the library. So, let's talk about that process now. Just a few days after his TBN appearance from 12/19 that we saw earlier, Kirk would proudly report that 2 of the libraries he requested to read at, specifically ones in Indianapolis, Indiana and Scarsdale, New York, had bent the knee and granted him his request to do his story hour. And it's here where we get our first official library response to all this nonsense, thanks to the incredible team of folks at the Scarsdale Public Library in Scarsdale, New York. Truly, I think Scarsdale broke the whole story wide open with their pointed analysis of exactly what took place between them, Kirk Cameron, and the Brave Books team. But of course, since libraries do things like releasing thoughtful, detailed public statements rather than just whining into hot mics the way Kirk does, I think their response got less traction than it should have. The Scarsdale Public Library gave 2 public statements addressing the Kirk situation. One on 12/15 explaining the first denial, and then a second one on 12/19 explaining the supposed change they made to accommodate him. Now this is a bit dense on its own, as you can kind of see here, so for the sake of time, I'm going to summarize it all, but feel free to pause the video and read, or check the statement out at the link provided in the description. Kirk and the Brave Books team reached out to the Scarsdale Public Library, unprompted across multiple occasions throughout December of 2022, requesting to host a biblically themed children's story hour with some sort of stated right-wing political component. The library politely declined them for an official event, but the library also politely sent them the forms they needed to fill out to request a library public meeting room, which anyone could do, and that they would totally have access to as they requested. The library just wouldn't promote the story hour as an official event, due to its obvious political themes and the general principle libraries have to maintain neutrality in these types of situations. Kirk and his team would then become apparently outraged by this very reasonable request that they follow basic library policy, moving quickly to complain across all of conservative media about how they were being discriminated against by the libraries, as we saw earlier. And yet, since it took them a good week to fill out that meeting request form, it seems to me at least like this whole thing was just a gigantic temper tantrum based on the fact that the library wouldn't officially sanction Kirk's event. Once Kirk and his team followed the rules that everyone is subject to, the Scarsdale staff were happy to provide him space for his event. Again, while I can't prove it, I really do expect that the other 50 quote-unquote denials Kirk received probably all looked like this Scarsdale one in some capacity, since the tour went on without a hitch after these early difficulties, and because other library statements on the subject sound darn near identical to the one provided by Scarsdale. Kirk can moan about leftist librarians all he wants, but from everything I can see, it sounds like this whole thing was just a gigantic tantrum on the part of Kirk and Brave Books on account of the fact that libraries don't make a habit of giving special treatment for celebrity bigotry. Oh, and we also have evidence of a website promoting the Brave Books story hours as early as December 23rd of 2022. The Wayback Machine shows us that this page even had, at that point, download links for a full toolkit to help parents set up and arrange their own Brave Books story hour, which conveniently those links still worked and allowed me to download the toolkit for myself. Did you all know that dead download links sometimes still work on the Wayback Machine? Well, now you do. And among the sample schedules and coloring pages, the packet also included strikingly convenient information on things like discussing faith at your event and getting the library in trouble if they deny your request. Not that they would, but okay, Kirk. Of course, I can't say for sure that this packet is way too detailed to have been made on the fly and demonstrates that Brave's plan was to start shit the entire time, but that is certainly what I believe happened. And sadly, none of this stopped Kirk from dragging this whole thing out over the course of an entire year, and making everyone, our nation's beloved librarians most of all, just as miserable as possible throughout the entire process. But things really took a turn for the worse at a Brave Books story event event taking place at the public library in Hendersonville, Tennessee on February 25th, 2023. During this particular event, aforementioned whiny transphobic swimmer Riley Gaines took it upon herself to film an exceptionally transphobic promo for this unsanctioned event right in the library's entranceway. And then to loudly complain because some of the librarians in the background, and then loudly complain to the library staff behind her for their crime of making noise while trying to work around her?
Hi everyone, Riley Gaines here. As a college swimmer, I went up against some of the best female athletes in the world. But not long ago, it became okay for biological men to compete against women in swimming. This made it much harder for hardworking female competitors such as myself to succeed. I found that most competitors are too scared to speak out against... Okay, this is just immature, and it's honestly extremely disrespectful.
That is.
Like, you guys are old enough to know that that is, like, extremely disrespectful.
Yes.
Like, to slam your feet or books or whatever on the ground, that's pretty ridiculous. We have 60 more seconds, and that's all that we ask of you guys. And it would be made quicker if we weren't slamming books and stomping our feet.
Now, tragically, as we're about to hear from Dakota, these kinds of petty snipes and irritations from agitated conservative patrons, well, they're nothing new for the brave Red State Library staffer. So during your time as a library employee, how did you see a lot of these like cultural conflicts we've talked about in our episode today playing out like on the floor, like in your daily work life?
We would see this kind of thing all the time. It was constantly around us. It's very interesting to see the types of materials that everyone is checking out. You see what people check out and what they bring back. There's books and films and all sorts of things at the library that you would never think would exist, but they do, and there's an audience for it. In terms of the, like, sometimes patrons would make comments about stuff, about an item on a display that they didn't like, maybe. I'm remembering an incident where someone, not an incident, but like, you know, people would come in and there's people who read every one of the like Fox News biographies that comes out, you know, and someone was checking one of those out, and I guess I had maybe a sour look on my face or something, but he was like, "Oh, you don't like that?" You know, or like, and it's like, I didn't say anything. Like, here's your book. You know, a lot of it would come in around the types of books that were on display, and we were critical of the kinds of displays that the library was promoting and allowing. Some of the times we felt that it's like, you know, there's a big Christmas display, and do we have other holidays represented? I worked in circulation, and so there was a lobby display. There is a lobby display that we are able to, most of the year, control what goes up there as like staff picks. And so that is a way for us to, as workers, to be able to put out books that we think are interesting, that we think people would like to read out there. And those are really well received. Like, people really like the staff picks display. But sometimes also we would see patrons, you know, take a book off of the display and throw it in the return bin.
So while it is absolutely awful that our great librarians have to deal with these jagoffs and their bigoted, regressive grandstanding, under normal circumstances, this whole thing likely would have been well within their control. But unfortunately, the presence of Kirk Cameron in the story means that we don't get the privilege of normal circumstances. Following the event, Kirk took to Facebook to complain about the so-called adverse treatment that he and his group received at their unsanctioned event. His already unnecessary criticism was then doubled down upon by Missy Robertson, former Duck Dynasty star and fellow celebrity presenter at this event, in an appearance on her father-in-law Phil's Unashamed podcast.
And so Kirk and I are standing there, and we're trying to do these little promo videos, and there's just a lot of noise happening. I look at one of the Brave team, and I was like, I'm talking, I just stop. And I was like, you're never gonna run this because of all the noise. Can you ask them to hold their voices down? We start talking again.
So are these people in the library?
The library staff. The library's not open yet.
Okay.
All the people are standing outside, all the attendees.
The staff, yeah.
The staff is behind the desk. So I look at the Brave team member again, and I said, I don't think they're getting the concept of, like, don't talk while we're doing these videos. So they walk over there again, and I have no clue at this point what's going on. I just think, you know, we do a lot of reality TV. We're not on a set. People just forget. We're in their space. You know, they forget sometimes to keep their voices down. So we're asking them a favor. So at this point, there's not. They're slamming books together. They're kicking cabinets. They're hollering out loud. Well, a guy in the background walks down, and one of the Brave team members says, "Hey, can you ask your staff to hold it down?" And this guy yells, "Hey, you're not supposed to be here anyway." And Kirk fires back and says, "Yes, we are supposed to be here." And at that moment, I thought, what's going on here?
Yeah.
Like, there's a little tension for some reason.
Now look, I know what Missy wants me to take away from that story, but instead all I hear is that she, along with Kirk and his other conservative cronies, commandeered working library space before open hours even, in the name of promoting an unsanctioned conservative religious event, demanded special privileges to both advertise and express bigotry in ways that are generally against good library policy, and then somehow managed to get offended when disgruntled employees expressed their displeasure with all of this active antagonism through such menacing countermeasures as... Hold on a second, let me check my notes here. Working a bit more loudly than normal. Please, remember this anytime one of these goons calls you a snowflake. But, regardless of their decency or accuracy, these accusations nonetheless had major consequences for the staff at the Hendersonville Library when deranged prick Mark Frakel decided to react to this whole debacle by calling in a bomb threat to the library. Now please note, there was no bomb and no one got hurt. Hell, this terrorist loser lived in freaking Connecticut when he made the call to Tennessee. And yet, the blame for this act of domestic terrorism landed at the feet of library director Alan Morales for the crime of, I don't know, having someone else threaten him and his staff with violence. And he would end up being fired unjustly in many people's opinion, including mine, in a split decision vote by the library's board following the incident. So yes, Kirk cost someone their job over this stupid stunt of his, and he wasn't even close to finish with his shenanigans at this point either. He would continue his tour of U.S. libraries on behalf of Brave through the end of spring and into the beginning of summer 2023, along the way facing respectful pushback he would then whine about on social media.
These are interesting pictures, right? These they look like drag nuns, right? Like the Munsters in drag, and some of them, I think they were from a group called the Hillbilly Harlots, and they were there sort of blocking the kids' views and holding up these signs about Christian hate and stuff like that. But the parents actually turned it all around. Many of them were homeschoolers, and they used this as an object lesson for their kids to demonstrate the difference between light and dark, between like truth and error.
You know that devil we teach you about?
Here we go.
Sure, Kirk, keep vilifying the drag queens all you want, but I haven't seen them holding impromptu sing-alongs in the middle of library walking space, which I feel the need to remind everyone is the quiet part of the library.
Could have been.
But Kirk would save his most daring act of performative confrontational bigotry for June of 2023, using the beginning of Pride Month as an opportunity to release his newest Brave book, Pride Comes Before the Fall, complete with this absolutely infuriating trailer.
Greed, wrath, envy, lust, gluttony, and sloth. But leading this list of the 7 deadly sins is pride. The Bible warns us that arrogance and self-exaltation is the downfall of man. And if you haven't heard it out loud, it's one of those things you just know inside. Humility is the key to a good and joy-filled life. But much of our society has set aside an entire month to celebrate pride, focusing on self. And our kids are being indoctrinated by a selfish culture, and we're seeing the consequences of that all around us. Truth is exchanged for a lie, good things are passed off as evil, and we are at a pivot point in history. We as parents and grandparents need to be determined to teach the next generation right morals. Brave Books is an exceptional tool that you can use to help teach the kids in your world important lessons like the sacredness of life, gender identity, and in my new book, Pride Comes Before the Fall, humility.
And y'all know Kirk didn't waste any time after that getting back to his library tour, reading this new book at an event in Missouri City, Texas on June 2nd. However, throughout the summer of 2023, Kirk actually focused less on individual libraries themselves and instead developed a feud with the American Library Association itself. Let's find out a little bit more about that now. Now, by this time in the story, all eyes seem to be set on August 5th and a big Brave Books event called See You at the Library. On that day, Kirk pushed all of his fans and Brave Books devotees to enact his story hour plan on a grand scale by renting out rooms at their own public libraries all across America in an effort to be as antagonistic as possible in the name of Christ.
Brave Americans, are you ready to help me stop the indoctrination of our children? Will you help me take back our country by restoring her to the faith and values that once made America so healthy, strong, and free? I have a plan. Do you remember that movement called See You at the Pole, where families gather at the local school flagpole to pray? Well, I am taking this to a new level. I'm calling on all families who love God and love America to gather at our local public libraries to pray, sing, and read a children's book of virtue. Imagine thousands of local libraries filled by you and your friends, your pastors, your teachers, local representatives, turning our nation back to God and moral goodness. Go to bravebooks.com right away and sign up to be part of See You at the Library. Join me and thousands of other brave Americans, and with God's help, let's do our part to rescue our children's future and turn this nation around one library at a time. It's happening this summer, August 5th. I want to see you at the library.
So yeah, a giant singing, clapping, and praying event to end American degeneracy or whatever, right in the middle of a space that is specifically designed to be a quiet sanctuary available to all of our society's most marginalized and downtrodden. And then repeat that 268 times over all across the country per Brave Books' own final tally. So reasonably, at a training program in early June, the ALA tried to provide libraries with some tools and recourse on how to prevent these events and protect their vulnerable patrons.
We're seeing groups that seek to censor LGBTQA materials or disparage or silence LGBTQA library users, exploit the open nature of a public library to advance their agendas. For example, right now, Brave Books and Kirk Cameron are conducting a campaign to take over libraries on August 5th by encouraging individuals to apply to use library meeting rooms for Kirk Cameron story hours. First, remember that as I said before, libraries are for receipt of information. That means that the First Amendment does not require the library to even offer meeting room spaces. So this, in regard to the Kirk Cameron thing, you are not obligated to offer public meeting room spaces or invite the public in to use the library. Of course, this might be something you don't want to do. You don't want to deny your community access to a public meeting room to serve those community members and community groups that really need to use it. Here are some of the options that allow you to keep control of your library and its meeting rooms for the use of your community and for the use of the library users who might be targeted by a particular event. You can limit access to meeting rooms to persons eligible to hold a library card in your community. You can make a priority for library-sponsored programs. And what if your library decided to offer a whole host of programs in its meeting room on August 5th, making it unavailable for the public?
Oh no, how dare they hand out a list of perfectly ethical and reasonable ways to stop this giant unwanted travesty. And how dare they make them totally voluntary. And as you might expect by now, Kirk reacted to this very minor and very reasonable challenge by taking a 3-month-long detour dedicated to just basking in this made-up victimhood, like we can see here in this interview with conservative outlet Newsmax.
But let's get to what you just mentioned there, where the American Library Association, which does receive taxpayer funding, is trying to sabotage your event on Saturday. You say emails have been leaked where ALA members suggest maybe blocking off meeting rooms, calling you a public threat because of your right-wing thoughts. Can you tell us more about this?
Well, you're exactly right. So the ALA is an organization that receives grants from the federal government. They receive other monies as well, but taxpayer dollars are given to them, and that's to be used to encourage people to come to libraries. Well, the ALA has been caught on video actually naming us by name, saying, here are some ways that librarians can prevent the Kirk Cameron thing, the See You at the Library Brave Books thing from happening, even suggesting that you might come up with other programming that makes all the space unavailable for those families who want to come participate in that event. And so they're blocking people from coming to the library while simultaneously promoting things like drag queen story hours.
Okay, Kirk, now here's the thing. You don't get to say the libraries blocked your event. By your own admission, they offered you 268 separate locations to host it. And regardless of all the uproar, Kirk's event otherwise seemed to go off without a hitch all across the country. Following that, Kirk would still continue to work with Brave Books through the end of the year, although it seems like at that point he kind of just stepped back and let everybody else do the story hour stuff and stuck to his regular conservative interview circuit. Folks like aforementioned transphobic swimmer Riley Gaines and her transphobic surfer friend Bethany Hamilton are instead carrying the story hour torch at this point. James here in editing. Quick addendum, just because I discovered some new information while I was working on this. First of all, I didn't know until after I started working on this that Kirk wrote a third book for Brave Books. I can't really tell when he wrote it. The ISBN listing just says 2023, but the book is called The Fox, the Fair, and the Invention Scare. I won't even pretend to have looked into what it's about because I don't care. It also seems like Kirk came out of retirement for at least one book reading this year I could find so far, although I do find it kind of funny that this was at a gallery furniture. So from the libraries to the churches all the way down to the furniture stores, how the mighty hopefully have fallen. Kirk would pop back up at the end of 2023 to promote Skytree Book Fairs, a conservative alternative to the Scholastic Book Fair, which basically feels to me just like his regular story hours, but cutting all the fluff and skipping straight to the capitalism. Likewise, per that same interview we saw with Trent Talbot earlier, the goal is to make this See You at the Library August event a yearly headache for our libraries instead of just a one-time travesty.
Doing a one day where we just take over the libraries, August 5th, and that was just the start. We're going to make this an annual deal. Next year, our goal is 100,000 people.
And most recently, it seems like Kirk has finally gotten bored of all of these books and once again yearns for the small screen. In late February, he announced his newest partnered endeavor with Brave Books, a children's TV program called Adventures with Iggy and Mr. Kirk. This show will see Kirk starring alongside former Good Luck Charlie star turned conservative influencer Lee Allen Baker and a lizard puppet named Iggy.
Iggy and Mr. Kirk. Iggy and Mr. Kirk.
Great job, Iggy. I couldn't have done it better myself.
Thanks, Mr. Kirk. That wasn't so bad. But there is one thing I'd like to ask now that I think about it.
What's that, Iggy?
There are tons of kid shows out there. What makes ours super unique?
That's a great point. There are tons of kids shows out there, but how many of them can we actually trust?
In the past, the worst a parent had to worry about was mind-numbingly boring or annoying content. But the content parents face today is unlike anything that's ever come before.
That's right. It's not only wildly inappropriate, but strips away children's innocence with messaging that is confusing at best, or sets them on a path that ends in irreparable harm at worst.
Well, that was certainly something. I can't wait to watch them teach that lizard to be homophobic. And you can tell they're all super proud of this show because the trailer's unlisted, meaning you can only access it by going directly to their website and ensuring that most likely the only people who will see it are people who agree with them. And if this were just the tale of Kirk Cameron's strange 2023 beef with our American public library system, this is probably where we'd end the tale. Tragically, though, there is far more at stake here than just Kirk's terrible books and his unwanted story hours. As I mentioned before, Kirk Cameron has a remarkable ability to put himself in the proximity of big, important social currents, even while he himself tends to be an ineffectual blowhard. he's not like a change maker himself. He's more like a loud, squawking harbinger of change being made by other people. Thanks in large part to his seemingly never-ending D-list fame, his smarmy and performative brand of evangelical conservative Christianity, and his consistent strategy of just attaching himself to popular conservative causes for clout. And now, just like in his 2016 support for Donald Trump and his snide rejection of public safety measures in 2020, Kirk has once again shown himself to be remarkably effective at highlighting larger social trends within the broader picture of conservative evangelical villainy. Because true to form, throughout 2023, Kirk was exploiting a pre-existing wave of anti-library and more broadly anti-literacy action that has already been in motion across the US for years now. So in order to have the full context on just exactly how awful Kirk's behavior towards our great American libraries has been, we need to pay careful attention not just to how he himself operates, but also the context in which he is operating as well. For example, one thing I noticed is that while Kirk is happy to use Drag Story Hour as a kind of dark-sided foil for his own events, he is careful to avoid even hinting at the idea that they or anyone else should be banned from the library. Instead, Kirk relies heavily on the premise that he's only asking for the same rights as the Drag Story Hour program, and insisting on this bad faith platform of fairness in the usage of public resources. Let's unfortunately look at another Newsmax clip to hear more about this.
And so they're blocking people from coming to the library while simultaneously promoting things like drag queen story hours. And my message, our message to the ALA is you're welcome to come to these local public libraries. In fact, we want to include you. We would love for you to come and sing with us. We'd love for you to pray with us. We'd love for you to learn about love for country, love for family, and love for God. We welcome one and all.
And yeah, we'll get into all the philosophical reasons why that's nonsense in a moment. But I've actually found it much easier to show the duplicitous nature of all of this by taking a step back and looking at everything else our libraries are going through right now. See, even in that ALA training footage we saw earlier, footage which Brave Books posted themselves and which Kirk promoted in television appearances, we can get a glimpse into this force for censorship that absolutely does exist among the Christian conservative movement. See, while Kirk is correct in that his group is being noted in this footage, what he fails to mention is that he and Brave are not the only threat being mentioned in that training program. Down in the lower right corner here, we can see a reference to the organization Catholic Vote and their Hide the Pride campaign. This program, like Brave Book Story Hours, provides a free PDF toolkit giving step-by-step instructions for how to take down Pride-themed youth book recommendation displays, encouraging parents to check the books out themselves and then literally put them on a high shelf the kids can't reach until the end of Pride Month. They also encourage the filming and harassment of library staff, and even provide a guide for exactly which LGBTQIA+ books they want to target for these checkout-based bans. And sure, Kirk isn't technically a part of this organization, but all of us here are smart enough to know that this is the kind of organization that he and Brave Books are in league with, and we can tell that they certainly want to ban books, even if Kirk himself does not. Besides, a man who made a whole trailer for how much he dislikes Pride Month and the gay people it celebrates, well, he's clearly going to be in line with something like Hide the Pride. Let's use our godly discernment here. And here in this report from Fox 2 News in Detroit, we get to see just how aggressive these folks are at trying to get Pride taken out of their libraries.
In honor of Pride Month, the Ferndale Library set up several displays featuring books that highlight the LGBTQ+ community. But right at the onset of Pride Month, some people entered the building and decided it was time to send their own message.
On Sunday, June 4th, we had 2 members of the public come in, remove all the books from our young adult and children's Pride display, and replace them with library materials of a religious nature.
But before they left, they also did this.
They also selected a number of titles specifically about trans characters or about trans topics. And those items were all checked out.
The actions follow the agenda of the organization Catholic Vote, which describes itself as America's top Catholic advocacy organization, leading the fight for faith, family, and freedom.
Now, sure, you may say to yourself, well, these are just irritating private citizens with axes to grind. And their work probably won't amount to any real change, so there probably isn't any need to worry. And you would be very tragically wrong in that belief, as we'll see in this clip from News 12 on Long Island.
Pride Month displays and Pride books now banned from the children's section of some Suffolk libraries.
We know better as a society.
Florence Bracco is a Smithtown mom who has a gay son she fully supports. So she and her daughter Alexa are both heartbroken over the library board's decision to ban Pride displays in the children's section.
It's saying that it's not okay to be gay, that there's something wrong with you. We're not going to talk about you. We're not going to talk about you until you're older.
The order came in a memo which said the Board of Trustees passed a resolution to remove all Pride displays in addition to removing all books of the same subject on display from all children's sections at all Smithtown Library buildings. 4 of the 7 board members voted in favor of the ban. I'm looking for Marie Giorgenti, please. But none of them would speak with us today. Can we talk to you, Marilyn? Why would you want to ban Pride displays at the library?
And this trend has spread far beyond just a few isolated events, protesters, and libraries, and has now moved into the realm of full-scale book banning. A wide variety of books, and in fact whole categories of marginalized literature, are being targeted for bans all across the country. This quote comes to us from a 2023 article by Elizabeth A. Harris and Alexandra Alter of the New York Times, and it comes to us from an article accessed through my public library account. 2 years into a surge into book banning efforts across the country, restrictions that were largely happening in school libraries where they affected children are now affecting the wider community as well. More than 2 years into a sharp rise in book challenges across the United States, restrictions are increasingly targeting public libraries where they could affect not only the children's section, but also the books available to everyone in a community. The shift comes amid a dramatic increase in efforts to remove books from libraries, according to a pair of new reports released this week from the American Library Association and PEN America, a free speech organization. The ALA found that nearly half the book challenges it tracked between January and August this year took place in public libraries, up from 16% during the same time period the year before. The association reported nearly 700 attempts to censor library materials, which targeted more than 1,900 individual titles, more than during the same period in 2022, a year that saw the most titles challenged since the organization began tracking the data. So for record, that confused me the first time I read it. They broke the record for book bans in 2022 and then broke it again in 2023, just so we're clear. Most of the challenged books were by or about people of color or LGBTQ people. A year and a half ago, we were told that these books didn't belong in school libraries, and if people wanted to read them, they could go to the public library, said Deborah Caldwell Stone, the director of the ALA's Office for Intellectual Freedom. Now we're seeing those same groups come to public libraries and come after the same books, essentially depriving everyone of the ability to make the choice to read them. So yeah, I want you all to make no mistake about this. This is a conservative effort to attack progressive and marginalized ideologies in libraries and other literary settings, with no evidence that that trend is going the other direction, with their literature being censored. The conservatives are trying to take away our presence, not the other way around, no matter how much they want to whine to Tucker Carlson about it. And actually, Dakota and I chatted a little bit more about this in our conversation as well.
Our viewers will know that I also checked out 5 of the extremely libertarian Tuttle Twins children's series. I hated those books, and I don't think any children should read them. I have no interest in taking them out of there. I have no interest in moving them to the 3rd floor, and so I say that this is a very one-sided fight. That this is one political party and one social movement trying to take away the other's literature and the other's education, not the other way around.
Yeah, and it's because they feel like they're losing the quote unquote culture war and they're mad about it. But like, that's to me, it's a sign that they're really scared of what we're talking about and what we're doing. You're reading about queer identities and racial justice. These are the things that terrify them.
But perhaps most disturbingly, these anti-library attacks have started to make their way up to the policy level. My home state of Missouri has perhaps the most dramatic example of this terrible trend, thanks to aforementioned human root canal Jay Ashcroft and his recently enacted Ashcroft Rule. Now, what you're looking at here is the actual official version of the rule as it was enacted. But once again, we're just going to summarize. Essentially, this rule requires all Missouri libraries to develop a comprehensive protocol for exactly how books are categorized in regards to age appropriateness, and to get that protocol certified with the state librarian.
And fun fact, she answers directly to Jay Ashcroft.
Now, of course, I doubt any of us want this guy or anyone else like him to be the supreme authority on what is or is not too spicy for the local library. But all of this is just insulting, not only to the American Public Library as an institution, but to the people that work there. Let's hear Dakota tell us a little bit more about that now.
Can you tell us a little bit about how maybe these attempts to protect children from objectionable materials have actually ended up harming our youth, harming our children?
I mean, taking books out of kids' hands is pretty evil to me. That's pretty classic, like, bad guy. Objectionable is subjective, but libraries do have their own set of criteria for what goes into what age section. So it's not that people aren't considering what is age appropriate for children. It's just that the library has a different definition of that than conservatives. And also, conservatives have a different definition of that than parents. You don't want, like, the library does decide what books are age appropriate for different age ranges, but they don't tell your kids what to read and what they can't read. That's what parents are for. That's what parents do. Like, it's hurting kids by restricting their access to knowledge. Like, they're our future. We want kids to read, right? Like, we want kids to read. Like, this is like something we care about. We want kids to read. And when a book gets removed from the library, it's being removed from everyone, not just the parents who might find it objectionable. And it's okay if you object to if your kid picks up a book in the library and you don't want them to read it, like, then they don't have to check it out. Like, that's fine. Maybe it's not for you. It's okay. The whole library isn't for everyone. I'm not going to read every book in the library. No one's going to do that.
So yeah, it's probably pretty obvious by now that this whole naughty protocol thing, it's just another way for these evangelical jerkwads to get libraries and their staff in trouble for doing their jobs and promoting American literacy. Ashcroft's rule also lays out a bunch of ways for parents to restrict their kids' access to library materials, and also for them to object to a library's placement of said materials in the actual building. Anything to help those evangelical homeschool parents avoid actual parenting, right? The rule also cryptically states that no state-level library funding will go to the purchase of quote-unquote prurient materials for kids. For our viewers not born in ye old colonial pilgrim days, prurient apparently just means of a sexual nature. So this man really just dusted off the old thesaurus specifically for the purpose of annoying and irritating us all. But let's hear again now from Dakota about what it was like working in a library in Missouri while all of this was going on.
Were you involved in any more of the, like, formalized efforts to remove books? Did you have to pull books from circulation because of these types of things? What was your experience with those efforts?
Like, I didn't have the title of librarian, right? Like, we think everybody who works at the library is a librarian, which kind of, but like not, technically not. Formal book complaints did not go through my department. We would notice things though. The Jay Ashcroft rule, people would ask me like, well, what are the books on the list? And there was no list. I don't remember the exact terms, but it was extremely vague. And then it causes libraries to over-censor. One thing I paid a lot of attention to was what age range are titles being placed in, because this is another way to censor a library collection, is by just moving things around so that they're not found by a certain group of people. For example, at the Daniel Boone Regional Library in the Columbia Public Library, there's 3 floors. The first floor has all the children's books, right? There's from like preschool up to young adult. Young adult nonfiction is on the second floor, mixed in with the adult nonfiction. There is no young adult nonfiction section at the library. It's mixed into the adult stuff. So this way, all the teen books about sex are not in a teen section. Okay. So if someone has a complaint about them, they could say like, well, at least, it's how are teens even going to find it, right? It's like, it's not in the teen section.
Yeah.
If there was a teen nonfiction section on the first floor, there would be a little LGBTQ nonfiction section for teens, but there's not. So this is like a form of self-censorship. There's a nonfiction series that's called like Quick and Easy Guide to Pronouns, a quick and easy guide to disability and sex and trans identities and stuff like this. And half of these were in the young adult comics and half were in the adult comics.
No.
And so I sent an email to someone being like, hey, you know, the publisher says these books are for teens and up, and it seems like we've got them kind of split, and I'm wondering why. But then that just caused them to put them all into adult, right? They are like, it's easier to self-censor and just sort of move things up. It's an easy way to avoid a challenge before the challenge even happens. So they do some of the work for them just to avoid the challenges.
And see, you now may notice that unlike Hide the Pride, which was very overt in the books it wanted to take down, instead the Ashcroft rule seems to go out of its way to be as vague and confusing on that subject as it possibly can be. I mean, hey, let's hear from the ingrown toenail himself while he flails miserably trying to give even a basic defense of this stupid policy.
This might sound new. A lot of it is actually regurgitated debate on the principle, because in the 1980s our country did go through sort of a moral panic. There was a lot of different censoring, labeling of what movies, TV shows kids could and should consume. We came out with labels. Libraries have had that long ago. You're familiar with the Dewey Decimal System, and as you know...
Well, they don't use Dewey Decimal anymore.
Right, but you understand the principle in theory. There's also the idea that parents have a role here, and as you know, local library boards already decide what controversial books they may or may not put on their shelves.
Right.
If it's from, you know, Mein Kampf is a ridiculous example, right? But do they put that on the shelves?
And
so why do you trust library boards, local governments, and parents to do their job?
Well, first of all, this rule empowers parents to do that. It gives them visibility and transparency into what the guidelines are.
Doesn't it threaten to take over local control?
Not at all, because the local library writes the policies.
But you take away their funding if they don't do what you want.
I didn't write their policy. I'm giving them the ability to write their policy. I'm just requiring that it be transparent and that the person that writes it be accountable to the local taxpayers.
Aren't local library board members already accountable to the local voters?
I'm not really sure they are.
But the confusing nature of this rule may not actually just be a result of Jay's incompetence, and may in fact be a deceptively brilliant way to turn the heat up on our libraries even more. See, because in addition to giving himself and our state's worst evangelicals far too much power of interpretation on these matters, this rule also places particular undue stress on some of our state's most vulnerable rural and small town libraries. Let's hear from Dakota a little bit more about her experiences with library defunding, and also how these defunding measures can affect different libraries in different ways.
As an employee, did those kinds of threats to like mass defunding, how does that affect you when you're trying to work and hold up such an important institution with a lot of moving parts while constantly being threatened with having your vital funding ripped out from under you?
I mean, on a personal level and as a worker, it doesn't feel good, because also, like, I was just telling you about the staff picks display, the feeling of like, they really don't want us to do the thing that I am doing. You know, we felt that we were up against the state, I guess. But in terms of practicality, the defunding was not really a major fear for us. Obviously, it's disgusting and would have had an impact on the library, but a portion of the library's funding is state funding, but also the Daniel Boone Regional Library has a tax levy. And so that's where most of the money comes from, and that wasn't going to be an issue. But the defunding is a much bigger issue for smaller rural libraries outside of major metropolitan areas. Losing state funding is a very real threat to those libraries. And so the, I guess, the incentive to pull books is stronger, because the funding is much more serious in those places.
So bigger, well-funded metropolitan libraries might be able to withstand all of Ashcroft's bluster and take the principled stance of holding on to those controversial materials that are being targeted. But smaller rural libraries, well, they might struggle to stand on principle like that, and otherwise may have to take even more draconian measures than normal when it comes to censorship in order to ensure that they don't lose critical funding. We can see this play out in what happened at the Patmos Library of Jamestown Township, Michigan. After staff refused to submit and banned several LGBTQIA-themed books aimed at teenagers, a massive effort was organized in the community that ended up overturning the library's local property tax millage, a revenue stream that comprised over 80% of the library's overall funding. The first vote against took place in August of 2022, and a second vote on the millage was again unsuccessful in November of 2022. Finally, a year later, in November of 2023, the people of Jamestown Township voted in favor of a new millage and restored funding to the library, but only after new labeling was added to the inside covers of all the challenged LGBTQIA+ books. So yeah, get rid of all the queer books, all the books about racism and sexism and capitalism and ableism, and anything else the conservative evangelicals don't like, or otherwise just risk losing all of your books. Alienate and stigmatize some of the kids by ostracizing, censoring, or removing literature tailored to their lives and experiences, or stand on principle and ensure that all of the kids in your community lose access to valuable educational tools and resources. And that's if they even get an option, with some communities just moving to flat out dissolve their libraries outright. That was nearly the fate of the public library in Llano County, Texas. There, county officials had taken a variety of books off the shelves, most notably several books concerning American systemic racism. When prompted by a federal court order to return those books to the shelves, the county officials then voted on whether or not to just close their entire library system. And while it didn't actually end up going through, we have no reason to believe that the worst couldn't have happened under different, less fortunate circumstances, or that it won't happen again, for that matter. And while it's not quite so easy for the federal government to involve themselves in the operations of local community public libraries, you can rest assured they're trying. After all, we live in a country with elected representatives like Clay Higgins of Louisiana, who openly professes dreams of just handing control of our libraries directly to the church, or Representative Lauren Boebert, seen here threatening citizens of Colorado for absolutely no reason other than her own bigotry. Hell, even Marjorie Taylor Greene stepped up her aggression, moving all that anti-drag story hour rhetoric from her own beleaguered local library, as we saw earlier, to now spouting similar nonsense in the hallowed halls of Congress.
Mr. Dodaro, can you tell me how much money was given to Drag Queen Story Hour?
I'm sorry, could you repeat that? Who?
Drag Queen Story Time, where men dress up as women and read confusing books to children.
Yeah. First, I thought you said dry clean. So, I'm sorry.
People ask me what I do for a living. I say drag queen.
It's got two words, drag queen, close enough.
But all jokes aside, I hope now that everyone can see just how interconnected all of these anti-library attacks are. This is a big movement acting strategically and cohesively in their attacks, in such a way as to put as much stress on our already overtaxed library system as they possibly can. Now, you may be asking yourself, why are these politicians all doing this? Why did Kirk Cameron take a year of his life just to play nanny boo-boo with our nation's beloved library system? Why are conservatives attacking and targeting libraries with such fury and such tenacity? And sure, some of it probably makes sense by now, but by digging a little deeper into the history of censorship, the history that holds the roots of what we're seeing today, I think we can see the answers to those questions really come into focus. Now, okay, one could say that this kind of anti-literacy action has been in motion for years at this point, but in all honesty, that's a bit of a misnomer. It's more like millennia. This excellent guide on banned books I found from the Library and Archives of Canada highlights evidence for mass government censorship over 200 years before the birth of Christ, when, in 212 BCE, Chinese Emperor Shi Huangqi is said to have buried alive over 400 historical scholars and burned all the books in his kingdom, under the belief that he could erase all prior history and just start everything with himself. And since that time, threats to the greater literacy have never really gone away. We effectively have examples of book bannings, book burnings, and other nefarious forms of information control from basically every single point in recorded human history. Rest assured that if at any time someone on this planet was trying to record information, there was someone trying to stop them from recording that information. Yet even over all that time, some strikingly consistent threads emerge in the motivations behind all of this grand-scale censorship and destruction. Threads that I think can give us some real insight into all of the anti-library action we're seeing in the US today. Friend of the channel and phenomenal content creator Princess Weeks gives us a really good framework to consider in her video, The Fiery History of Banned Books from the It's Lit series at PBS Storied.
Historically speaking, there are usually three big reasons books are banned: religion, morality, and politics. The three things you do not discuss in dinner.
You should watch that video and all of their other videos of the It's Lit series, and also all of the videos on Princess Weeks' own channel because they're all absolutely incredible. But according to Princess Weeks, there are generally three motivations behind widespread attempts to suppress, censor, and destroy literature, namely those of politics, morality, and religion. Now, obviously, there's going to be some overlap and crossover amongst these three very interconnected concepts. But all the same, just notice throughout the rest of the story how often you see one or all of the heads on this terrible censorship demon, because almost all censorship throughout human history seems to end up back here one way or another. And speaking of demons, while all of us modern Americans may certainly not be happy with the evangelical shenanigans we have to put up with today, perhaps no group of people in the entire history of this planet has been more censorship happy than their forerunners, the medieval Christians. Near the end of the 15th century, for example, an influential Dominican friar named Girolamo Savonarola hosted a series of what he called bonfires of the vanities. At these events, large piles of art and literature, often turned in by repentant artists themselves, would be burned in a mass rejection of secular culture, which personally I find particularly entertaining since every depiction I've ever seen of this guy makes him look like an evil wizard straight out of the D&D monster manual. And yeah, it's not super relevant to this conversation, but I think it's funny. Ironically though, Savonarola would end up meeting the exact same fate to which he subjected all of that secular art and literature. When under papal authority, he was excommunicated, arrested, tried and convicted of heresy, and then hung while also being lit on fire at the same time. But moving into the 16th century, nearly the exact same fate would end up befalling William Tyndale and his attempts to translate the Bible into English. Attempting to maintain the consolidated power of the clergy under the Latin Bible, which few common folk could read, the church hung and burned Tyndale as a heretic, just like Savonarola, alongside thousands of copies of his translation. In fact, it would take until the early modern age before the church would seemingly figure out methods of censorship that didn't involve just lighting all of the bad books and the people that wrote them on fire before calling it a day. And they did that with the introduction of the Index Librorum Prohibitorum. This gargantuan list of books dates back to the 1560s and acted as an official comprehensive do not read list for Roman Catholics all the way until it was done away with by Pope Paul VI over 400 years later in 1966. The ILP targeted everything from Robinson Crusoe to Les Miserables to the entire collected catalogs of many, many European philosophers in an effort to prevent Catholic readers from interacting with literature and material that countered the Church's teachings in any way. And moving ourselves over to the United States, our relationship with literary censorship continues this long and storied history of anti-intellectualism, while also adding a few unfortunate quirks of our own. See, while the motivations for censorship here in the States aren't necessarily all that different than the ones we've already discussed, there are some which seem to uniquely motivate Americans to start swinging the ban hammer. And perhaps no motivation for censorship in the US is more powerful than that of racism. It turns out that the first book ever to face threats of widespread bans in the United States was none other than Harriet Beecher Stowe's abolitionist children's book, Uncle Tom's Cabin, due to fears that it would incite discontent in the slaveholding American South. And moving into the 20th century, children's book The Rabbit's Wedding was banned from every public library in Alabama in 1959 for encouraging racial integration. So yeah, that's a well that US censors dip into a lot. Now, the First Amendment of the United States Constitution, with its guaranteed right to the freedom of speech for all of its citizens thing, and its whole prevention of government-level religious favoritism, well, you would think that those two things would combine to make religious censorship at least something difficult to pull off in this country, right? Well, at least it should do that in theory. As most of us know by now, the United States is more than happy to censor literature and libraries of public interest in order to protect the sensibilities of the American right wing, using whatever methods or loopholes they can find to do so. And perhaps no greater demonstration of American religious censorship has ever existed than that of the Comstock laws. To tell us a little bit more about that, I'll be reading an excerpt of work written by yet another friend of the channel, censorship historian and seller of banned books, Ellen Reinisch, seen here in this Fundy Fridays file photo. And if it seems like I called in all my favors for this episode, you're right, I love me some friggin' libraries, damn it. But again, this from Ellen. In 1873, the Act for the Suppression of Trade in and the Circulation of Obscene Literature and Articles of Immoral Use, colloquially known as the Comstock Laws, or Act, were passed by Congress, effectively turning movements to ban books from a regional and state concern to a federal level. At first, these laws made it a federal crime to send any of the following through the U.S. Postal Service: contraceptives, abortives, sex toys, quote-unquote obscenity, personal letters with anything explicit, or any information describing any of the former items. Many states expanded on the Comstock laws with legislation of their own, but the most damning came from the District of Columbia, where the federal government has direct jurisdiction, passing legislation that made it a crime to sell, lend, give away, publish, offer to publish, or simply possess any of the material no longer allowed to be mailed. These laws were so sweeping that in some cases, anatomy textbooks were seized before they reached medical students. It's important to note the namesake of these laws, Anthony Comstock. In addition to utilizing New York City political connections to gain police powers to enforce the Comstock Act as a special agent of the U.S. Postal Service, he was also motivated by deeply held and extreme Christian beliefs. He advocated for Christian-led groups to combat perceived moral failings, which to him included the women's suffragette movement, to which he was staunchly opposed. During his crusade, Comstock was responsible for the destruction of 30,000 pounds of books deemed obscene and boasted that he drove 15 people to end their lives due to his relentless prosecution. Dear God! Well, thankfully we don't have to deal with such completely terrible, untenable laws as that anymore, right folks? And please note, smaller, more localized examples like the kinds we saw earlier, well, those were going on in this time frame too. For example, in 1881, Boston's district attorney, Oliver Stevens, threatened Walt Whitman, his publisher, and his seminal poetry book, Leaves of Grass, with a citywide ban unless some of its saucier elements were removed. Although I'm pretty sure that this poem might just be about eagles, I'm not sure. And all of this is particularly hilarious because it seems like they were just mad about the poem's Walt about straight sex, not realizing that Leaves of Grass has a whole-ass hot gay side plot right in the middle there. And speaking of all our beloved girls, gays, and theys, it turns out that the experiences of both women and the queer community, well, they're also popular targets for US censorship. Women's experiences in literature seem to come under particular fire in the US whenever they deal with sexuality or sexual assault, with even the slightest mention of such topics getting whole important books jettisoned from library shelves. For example, the Diary of Anne Frank is a book often removed from American libraries and schools, with its important lessons about the Holocaust being cast aside in favor of protecting teens from the tiniest bit of sex talk. Although reportedly, in 1983, folks from the Alabama State Textbook Committee sought to ban the Diary of Anne Frank just because it was, and I literally quote this, a real downer. Yeah, that's kind of the point. Likewise, Maya Angelou's I Know Why the Caged Bird Sings, another book with decades now of US-based censorship challenges to its name, is commonly targeted due to its unflinching portrayals of Angelou's own experiences with sexual assault as a young girl. And I know that I've already mentioned the massive nationwide spikes in attempts to ban queer literature that we're seeing at this very moment, but please know that even this unfortunate trend has roots deeper in the past than you might expect. In her article, Attempted Book Bans, the Censorship of Queer Themes in the 1950s, researcher Maria J. Quintana Rodriguez discusses the 1950s wartime pulp novel Women's Barracks, written by French author Teresca Torres. This book was certainly ahead of its time, with lesbian themes so overt that a whole House subcommittee was essentially developed just to take the book down. While this House Select Committee on current pornographic materials wouldn't end up imposing any formal penalties or making any policy changes, its condemnation did lead the book's publisher to hastily add in a narrator whose whole job in the book was just to condemn all the lesbian activity going on. Likewise, Quintana Rodriguez also highlights how perceptions of both queer literature and the overall queer experience as pornographic or obscene, well, those led to a great deal of informal censorship efforts throughout the years as well. She notes the story of James Baldwin, author of the classic American novel Go Tell It on the Mountain. His 1956 sophomore novel, Giovanni's Room, struggled to find a publisher and faced years of public scrutiny and criticism over its exploration of male bisexuality, even beyond any formal censorship challenges it received as well. And bringing us into the new millennium, the Christian right's recent discovery and subsequent vilification of the trans community have now made them the favored target for wielders of the banhammer. We can see this in action taken against trans author Maya Kobabe, whose memoir Genderqueer took the top spot of most banned book in the US for 2023. And to round out all of the many, oh my god, how are there so many reasons for censorship in the US? That is something that I consider to be a distinctly American motivation of sorts. Namely, the motivation of capitalism. See, at least in my research, no other society I could find seemed at all interested in shutting down their libraries simply for the crime of being unprofitable. Because they're unholy, gay, or bad for the king? Absolutely. But never simply because they don't generate direct revenue. And yet here in the modern US, you can find plenty of articles detailing why it would be such a good idea to privatize the public library. They'll tell you it's more efficient, they'll tell you it'll save money for local residents, that it'll breed innovation, so forth and so on. But perhaps no one has spoken the cause of private libraries more clearly and hilariously than Forbes contributor and so-called economist Panos Mordikotis. His work on the topic is so incredibly brain dead that it actually kind of works really well as an argument against privatization, which is probably why the ALA maintains an archived copy publicly available on their website for anyone to read at any time. And let's honor those efforts by reading a couple excerpts, shall we? Amazon should replace local libraries to save taxpayers' money, by Panos Mordikotis at Forbes. Amazon should open their bookstores in all local communities. They can replace local libraries and save taxpayers lots of money while enhancing the value of their stock. There was a time where local libraries offered the local community lots of services in exchange for their tax money. They would bring books, magazines, and journals to the masses through a borrowing system. Residents could borrow any book they wanted, read it, and return it for someone else to read. They also provided residents with a comfortable place they could enjoy their books. They provided people with a place they could do their research in peace with the help of friendly librarians. Libraries served as a place where residents could hold their community events, but this was a function they shared with school auditoriums. There's no shortage of places to hold community events. Libraries slowly began to service the local community more. Libraries introduced video rentals and free internet access. The modern local library still provides these services, but they aren't for free. Homeowners have to be financed by taxpayers in form of a library tax. It is usually added to school taxes, which in some communities are already high. Meanwhile, libraries don't have the same value they used to. The reasons why are obvious. Of course, there's Amazon Books to consider. Amazon have created their own online library that has made it easy for the masses to access both physical and digital copies of books. Amazon Books is a chain of bookstores that does what Amazon originally intended to do: replace the local bookstore. It improves on the bookstore model by adding online searches and coffee shops. Amazon Go basically combines a library with Starbucks, and expanding into the local library space will be an opportunity for the technology giant. At its core, Amazon has provided something better than a local library without the tax fees. This is why Amazon should replace local libraries. The move would save taxpayers money and enhance the stockholder value of Amazon all in one fell swoop. I want you all to know that I have read many terrible things in the course of my time on this channel, but maybe none so annoying as the one you just heard me read. But yeah, no, I totally get his point, though. I mean, why can't we just let the conservatives shop for the books they want at, I don't know, Trump books or whatever, while all of us slay queens, girl bosses, and thembos can pick up our books from RuPaul's new queer-friendly online bookseller, Allstora, regardless of all the gross things they may be willing to sell on there. Wow. Matt Walsh's What is a Woman? Now that's what I call promoting queer stories and perspectives. And yeah, after people complained, they got rid of a few of the more absolutely horrific titles. But as of March 31st, I was personally still able to find links to purchase a book about Nazis by conservative lunatic Dinesh D'Souza, a biography of Kirk Cameron's mom, and an actual brave book, all on the Allstora website. Meanwhile, I was shocked to find that right-wing online bookseller The Right Bookstore didn't sell genderqueer. You would think that such a constitutional website would be interested in defending free speech and promoting books banned by the government, but I guess not. And while we're at it, let's talk for a second about how Kirk Cameron, this supposed champion of homeschool families and their rights, is pushing on those same families an expensive for-profit book series while also attacking our free public libraries? Hey, Dakota, you got any thoughts on that for me?
Homeschoolers, you mentioned, are some of the biggest library users, coming in once a week and checking out 50 books at a time. Like that's like a lot. The amount of money someone is saving by doing that would not be possible without the public library.
You know, I gotta say, Kirk, you might be able to get our country to that whole homeschool awakening a little faster if you'd leave the libraries alone and stop bleeding all those homeschool families dry with your $20 picture books. But let's get even more dystopian with it, shall we? Meet Library Systems and Services, LLC, currently the U.S.'s largest and, as far as I could tell, only private library operation and management company with over 80 libraries currently under their control. While LSS doesn't necessarily maintain ownership of these libraries, they do make a profit by taking them over and operating them based on contracts they take from local governments. Let's hear straight from the LSS YouTube page about why they think privatizing the library is such a marvelous idea.
I look at two things when you go with a company taking over any public services. One, are the services going to be the same or better level of service? Second, how much money do we save?
Running a library is hard. To me, it makes sense to outsource library operations to a private company like LSNS because this is their business. When it's obvious that the library runs both better, more positively with a private company, then it would be illogical to do anything other than that.
Okay, yeah, sure. Cheaper, better, easier, whatever. It's the same stuff we've all heard before when our bosses come into a meeting and start talking about synergy before they start cutting bathroom breaks. And what might be the downsides of this privatization process, you might be thinking? Well, per this list sent to the Fullerton Observer by former children's librarian and concerned local hero Janine Jacobs, here are some things to consider. The reduction of operating hours, staff, and programs due to lack of profitability. Substituting local reference librarians and patron interest requests with a focus on popular bestsellers and large, low-cost bulk orders that often leave their libraries with a lack of Spanish language content. Replacement of unionized public sector library staff with private, non-union staff who can't negotiate their compensation or stand up to book bans. A complete lack of transparency regarding finances and operating costs, since private companies don't have to report those things the way public utilities do, all the while not even actually saving their local communities any money at all. Not that we know, of course, since they don't have to tell us anyway. And just to make it as ironic as we possibly can, we even have reports that LSS may have fired Priscilla Donovan, former director of the public library in Leander, Texas, for supporting a drag story hour event. So yeah, maybe at this point I could rest on my laurels and say that obviously public libraries are superior to private ones. This video is already long and I've already hit that dead horse with like 3 chair shots and an elbow drop at this point. But I want to make sure that everyone here grasps exactly what they're trying to take away from us. Because the American Public Library is in every sense of the word a national and historical treasure that these conservatives and evangelicals are actively trying to take away from us as we speak. And so with that in mind, let's take a step back in time now to discover the history and the development of the modern tax-funded American Public Library. Now, yeah, libraries have existed in some capacity since ancient times. I'm sure most of you here have probably heard of the library at Alexandria. Older still, though, clay tablet libraries like those found in Syria are thought to have existed nearly 2,000 years before the birth of Christ. However, these were generally only for religious, scholarly, or political use, and not for the public. In fact, the world's oldest still functioning library is one of this kind. The library at the University of Al-Qarawiyyin in Fez, Morocco, was built to house religious texts for the adjacent Al-Qarawiyyin University and mosque. Believed to have been built around 860 AD by wealthy heiress Fatima al-Fahiri, that would mean that the library has been in continuous service for 1,100 years now. And speaking of rich benefactors, the first publicly accessible library we are aware of seems to be the one established by ancient Greek ruler Pisistratus, who, in addition to having a hilarious name, also donated his own massive book collection to the city of Athens after his death, with the explicit instructions that it be made available for free to the public. And moving over to the US, libraries actually predate the US itself, with the first American colonial libraries being traced all the way back to the early 18th century before the American Revolution. Many local colonial churches would maintain a library for the community as part of their general operations. These books would then have been made available to the public for free consumption, though presumably all of the texts would have been religious in some capacity. And it's admittedly an excellent recruiting strategy when you may legitimately be the only person in the area with books to provide. Notably, the funny-named Society for the Propagation of the Gospel in Foreign Parts, or the SPG, seems to have been a particularly large player in the story of the American library. The SPG considered the operation of a library for their local flock to be a core duty of the church, and as such, many of our country's first local libraries can be accredited directly to them. Like Fatima al-Fahiri and Pisistratus before them, though, a lot of America's earliest libraries would be built upon the large book collections of the wealthy, which would then make their way down to the poor through various means. One good example of this would be Benjamin Franklin's Junto Club, which is admittedly kinda hard, I think, to put into context for modern audiences. Let's hear now instead from Dr. Rosalind Reamer at Drexel University. She explains it about as well as I think anyone can.
The Junto was meant initially to be a self-improvement organization. Franklin and his friends created this group as a discussion group, almost like a book club. They would meet regularly and they would pose questions to each other, to the assembled, to answer. And these questions were designed to help them figure out how to think more critically and how to think of themselves as sort of rising young mechanics, as they called themselves. So the Junto didn't start out as being a way to improve the community at large. It was more self-improvement. Eventually, though, the questions that they asked themselves made them realize that they needed to do more to learn more, and they needed books and they needed information. So one of the first things they did was to create a library, a shareholding library. And the Library Company of Philadelphia, which they started in 1731, was a way to pool their resources to buy books, since almost all books that were published would have been from London and had to be imported.
And ironically, this early American library prototype would operate on the all too modern subscription-based model. meaning that membership was kept at least some degree to those wealthy enough to be able to pay the membership fee. Not to mention that the fact that it was a private organization meant it could just discriminate against whoever it wanted. And back in that time period, we're all well aware that means women and non-white people. Now, interestingly, this organization was called the Library Company of Philadelphia and is in fact still in operation to this day. Founded in 1731, the organization currently serves as a research library specifically for American colonial history and culture. And per Daniel Bainbridge at PBS, the LCP was also the first known library to have its collection constructed based on the taste of its patrons rather than a single unified ideology like Christianity.
In the early 18th century, they began operating the library like joint stock companies, whose members agreed to pool resources for their mutual benefit. They worked together to purchase books, which subscribed members could check out, bring home, read, and return. Augst also notes that part of the significance of the Library Company of Philadelphia is that they ordered and stocked books based on the expressed interests of their subscribers, rather than curating the collection based on a particular ideology.
It also boasts being the first library collection ever where patrons could take home the books they checked out. Truly, a novel concept at the time when it was not uncommon for libraries to just straight up chain the books to the shelves. To be fair, it was a long time after Ben Franklin's age where the wealthy benefactor would stop being important to the development of the American library. A very notable example of this system that we can still see in action today would be that of the Carnegie libraries. Through a wide-ranging program of donations out of his personal fortune, early 20th century American industrialist and maybe wealthiest person to ever live, Andrew Carnegie, would come to finance a massive number of America's libraries throughout the first half of the 20th century. In the end, Carnegie would go on to finance the creation of over 2,500 libraries globally, almost 1,700 of which were in the US. And of those 1,700 libraries, around 800 are still open and operating to this day. Although now we operate them in a public capacity. But Carnegie's story is a popular one for the conservative libertarian crowd that sees nothing wrong with letting libraries be built purely on the whims and ideologies of the 1%. And it's not that hard to see why. This from Susan Stamberg at NPR. It was pioneering, public and free. Those were the visionary keystones of Carnegie's library mission. The mission was born in Allegheny City, Pennsylvania, where Carnegie worked as a bobbin boy in a textile mill. His job was to fill the bobbins with thread and oil them for the machines. He was determined to improve his lot, but he couldn't pay the $2 subscription for a local library that was available only to apprentices, and he certainly couldn't afford to buy books. He sent a letter to the library administrator asking for access to the library, but the administrator turned him down flat, so 17-year-old Andy got the letter published in the Pittsburgh Dispatch. He made his case so well that the administrator backed off immediately, explains Carnegie biographer David Nassau, and the library was open to working men as well as apprentices. He got what he wanted. In 1889, Carnegie wrote an article called The Gospel of Wealth, in which he spelled out his views on philanthropy. In bestowing charity, the main consideration should be to help those who help themselves. The rich should give so the poor could improve their own lives, and thus the lives of the society. Giving was a code of honor. The man who dies rich dies in disgrace, Carnegie said. See, we can totally trust hyper-wealthy capitalists to just continually build large and important infrastructure on the behalf of all of us, and at no real direct benefit to themselves, simply because they understand the value of hard work and opportunity. Right? Well, no, as was probably obvious by how I worded all of this. From like literally 2 sentences later in the exact article I just read. Now, Carnegie was a complicated man. Brilliant, charming, generous, and brutal. Carnegie biographer Les Standiford, author of Meet You in Hell, says the industrialist presided over what is considered the country's most bitter labor dispute. The Homestead Steel Strike of 1892, in which he and Henry Clay Frick conspired to mercilessly beat down the steel workers who were striking for better pay and better working conditions. It stands to this day as the worst labor conflict in American history, Standiford said. Increase our wages, the workers demanded. What good is a book to a man who works 12 hours a day, 6 days a week? Nassau says Carnegie thought he knew better and replied to his critics this way: "If I had raised your wages, you would have spent that money by buying a better cut of meat or more drink for your dinner. But what you needed, though you didn't know it, was my libraries and concert halls, and that's what I'm giving you." So yeah, it turns out that the man who was worth over $300 billion in today's US dollar was a self-righteous megalomaniac and an old-fashioned robber baron, pissing on the working class all at once. Tale as old as at least the Industrial Revolution, and certainly not the kind of person I want in charge of whether or not my town gets a library. No, the American library as we know it, at least in my opinion, can be traced back to the Peterborough Town Library in Peterborough, New Hampshire. Founded in 1833, it is believed that the Peterborough Library is the first ever fully tax-funded library in the world. Not the US, mind you, the world. Seriously, it is hard to get me to feel legitimate patriotism anymore, but by God, when I read that sentence, I swear, I stood up and saluted my computer like a JROTC kid in the flag section at Walmart. Really though, it's hard to overstate how big of an innovation this was for the time. This from Larry T. Nix at the very cool named libraryhistorybuff.org. The Peterborough Town Library in New Hampshire was founded at a town meeting on April 9th, 1833. The Boston Public Library, which was America's first large public library, was not legally established until 1852, 19 years later. Jesse H. Shera in Foundations of the Public Library makes the case for the importance of the founding of the Peterborough Town Library. The public library is in every sense an institutional descendant of the social library, but in its governmental relationships, it represents an innovation. At Salisbury and Lexington, municipal support was introduced to strengthen existing social libraries, but at Peterborough, New Hampshire in 1833, a library was established which from the beginning was truly a public institution, and in all its relationships to the community was remarkably like the public library of today. The significance of the Peterborough Town Library, then, lies less in its primacy than in its modernity. Sidney Ditzian, in Arsenals of a Democratic Culture, said this about the establishment of the Peterborough Town Library. "The account of the establishment of a town library at Peterborough, New Hampshire is unique in that here we have an instance of what appears to be the spontaneous generation of an entirely new form. Here, without the stimulus of private donation, without the permission of state legislation, without the semblance of a model in the mother country, a tax-supported town library was born." I am legitimately starting to cry reading this. And so yeah, it was this kind of publicly developed and tax-supported library that we are all generally familiar with, which first sprung up in Peterborough. And over time, as advances in printing technology shifted books from something of wealth and status for the upper class to something of common availability, so too would the meaning of the places where we stored those books change as well. Where old libraries served to protect rare, approved documents and then disseminate their contents only to a chosen few, modern libraries not only house information, but democratically serve to make that information as available to as many people as they possibly can. We can see an excellent demonstration of that in the ubiquitous bookmobile many libraries use to drive books all over their community for patrons and events alike, creating opportunity and accessibility and fun everywhere they go. Per the ALA, we can trace the first ever library bookmobile to the Washington County Public Library in Maryland, where in 1905, librarian Mary L. Titcomb secured a horse-drawn wagon, filled it with around 200 books, and sent the library's janitor out to deliver books to local children. But not all parts of this story are as pleasant as that either. Being that this was the United States and all, it would still take most of the 20th century before the glorious American library would take shape as the community mainstay we know it to be today. For one, it took a shockingly long time for many places in the US to even get a public library. Per Dr. Michael Fultz at the University of Wisconsin-Madison, many entire states reported not having even one library at the turn of the 20th century. This was particularly a problem in the impoverished American post-war South. And to be fair, if it weren't for the aforementioned mega-billionaire Carnegie, a lot of the libraries that are there now wouldn't exist at all. Women also had a very hard time making their way into these supposedly public libraries. See, apparently in the latter half of the 19th century, libraries were seen as much more rough and tumble masculine spaces rather than the calm, welcoming ones we're familiar with today. Per Aaron Blakemore at JSTOR Daily, a particularly big concern for the time was the quote-unquote library loafer, a derogatory term used to describe lazy, unemployed men who hung around these free libraries doing nothing valuable with their time and just causing problems. See, today we just call him Kirk Cameron. Well, okay, but per reports, the library loafers were actually a little worse than Kirk. They were particularly known for their lecherous and harassing behaviors towards women who dared to patronize their local library. And so obviously with this being the 1800s and all, it was decided that patron segregation was of course the only answer. Enter the ladies' reading room! Again, Aaron Blakemore at JSTOR Daily. Though some of the spaces were actual rooms, most were segregated alcoves or spaces within the library that were designated as women's only. Soft design elements like paintings and frescoes emphasized femininity, while domestic details like carpets and parlor-like upholstery evoked women's home sphere. Tellingly, these spaces broadcast women's supposed inferiority in reading skill, taste, and desire. Often they were placed in basements or next to children's rooms or administrative offices. They contained fewer, less functional tables than men's spaces, and were filled with reading material that reflected stereotypes about their intellect and proper roles. While the general reading rooms provided serious readers with large, rectangular tables that encouraged extended, solitary examination of hefty tomes, writes Van Slick, ladies' reading rooms typically provided tables that suggested a very different interaction with books. Some spaces, she notes, were not even designed for reading. They were intended instead for letter writing. These special spaces were designed to keep prying loafers out, but they were often visible from other parts of the library and even resembled stages or shadow boxes. The male gaze appropriately directed, writes Van Slick, both maintained social order by policing women's behavior and encouraged men to be more moral by exposing them to the spectacle of well-behaved women. So yeah, dudes are being creeps to women at the library. Obviously, the solution is to stick all the women in a centralized reading cage and then decorate it like an AI coffee shop playing lo-fi chill beats to read/get harassed to. Likewise, racial segregation of these supposedly public libraries was rampant well into the 20th century. Once again, in this section, I will be paraphrasing Dr. Michael Fultz of the University of Wisconsin-Madison. By the late 1930s, Southern Black Americans were half as likely as their white counterparts to have an accessible library in their local area. Some public libraries would offer segregated services for Black folks, but usually it was just denial of entry with no other recourse. In turn, Black Americans developed their own, completely independent libraries. Many early Black libraries were just communal book collections housed in the spare rooms of private homes, made available to the public for no other reason than to support the community. Black colleges and universities would also sometimes open their otherwise private libraries to local Black residents, recognizing that they may be the only place with the resources to provide such a service at all for their local community. Black Americans were also unable for many years to receive training in library sciences. That changed in 1925 with the founding of the Hampton Library School at Hampton College. And yet even then, Hampton was only chosen because the white benefactors financially backing the project liked that particular school because, and I quote, "Since the principal and the various heads of the school are white, it has had at all times the benefit of white managerial intelligence." And even under the weight of all of these difficulties, Black libraries and the librarians that staffed them also paved the way for our modern understanding of libraries as important hubs of social services and information, particularly for marginalized individuals. Again from Dr. Fultz, but this time I'm just going to quote directly. One prominent characteristic of early 20th century Black middle class and professional groups in the South as well as in the North was a determined effort to build positive community infrastructure for purposes of racial uplift. In Louisville, one of the leaders in these efforts was Albert Mazik, a Black educator who over the years served as principal at several local schools. Not coincidentally, during his 3-year tenure as principal at the segregated Central High School, Mazik led the campaign to establish a Black library. Several years later, Mazik also led led the effort to establish a second African American facility, the Eastern Colored Branch, which opened in 1914 and, like its predecessor, was housed in a Carnegie-financed facility. It was, however, primarily through the work of two other prominent members of Louisville's black middle class, Reverend Thomas Fountain Blue, the administrative head of the Western and Eastern Colored Branches, and Rachel Davis Harris, a children's library specialist and the chief assistant in charge of school and extension work, that Louisville's black libraries became regional models. From the start, replicating age-old patterns at black churches and black schools, Blue and Harris worked to establish the Western and Eastern Colored Branches as community social centers. In 1917, for example, 498 meetings were held at both branches, with close to 12,000 people in attendance. By that same year, more than 40 classroom collections had been established in 11 African American city and county schools. At its peak, before Blue died in 1935, Louisville's colored department administered extension library services in or through 2 junior high schools, 15 deposit stations, and 80 classroom collections. In addition, starting in 1912 and continuing through 1931, Blue organized an apprenticeship librarian class, the only opportunity for formal training of prospective black librarians in the South until the Hampton Library School opened in Virginia in 1925. So, the modern tax-supported full-service public library is all at once a celebration of American patriotism, black culture, and our collective social progress all rolled into one. It's a testament to what the U.S. can be, a demonstration of our commitment to changed ways, and an attempt to reconcile the atrocities of our past towards the hope of a better, more equitable future for all Americans. And if you can believe it, somehow in the past few decades, libraries have managed to get even better. Truly, the scope of services that some libraries provide today is simply staggering, and I've found often far greater than most folks even realize about their own libraries. Now, I can't provide an example of every single library service offered across the country somewhere, and I really highly encourage you to check out your own local library and find out just what they have to offer you. And tragically, not all public libraries are created equal. Smaller regional and rural libraries likely won't boast the same degree and scope of services as larger metropolitan ones do, and I personally am blessed to live in an area that really prioritizes library funding. So your results may vary depending on where you live. But to provide examples all the same, I reached out to my own Daniel Boone Regional Library System here in Central Missouri in order to get more information about the services available to my local community. And with all that being said, I'll admit that before I even started this, I kind of considered myself something of a library expert. I mean, I knew all about their digital service options, like the free ProQuest subscription they offer. This online academic reference database provides access to the hard paywalled New York Times, and literally got referenced earlier in this episode. It also, I'm going to tell you right now, was basically the only reason I ever made anything about George Santos, since you kind of need the New York Times to talk about New York politicians. So I say all that to say I literally make my living off of the resources provided by my public library. But to get a little personal, it goes even deeper than that for me. In my years as a community mental health caseworker and a nonprofit job coach, I often utilized the library's low or no-cost resources with my low-income clients. Computers and printers for job applications, low and no-cost children's events for cooped-up toddlers and their poor parents, quiet space to reflect after a hard day at work or school, and so much more. And all provided free of charge, or at least at the lowest cost you're going to find in this area. It's really hard for me to express how important that library was to a young cash-strapped caseworker like myself and my even more cash-strapped clients. And on an even more personal level, my late grandfather used the library in retirement as a means of stretching his own fixed income, foregoing Barnes & Noble to instead pay just 25 cents for requested library books he loved. Like the Jack Reacher books he loved so much. Whew, actually got kind of emotional there. Sorry, I really teared up here. Hey Dakota, can you help me out real quick?
don't buy and return books on Amazon. Don't do that. Just use the public library. You can get so much there from free. You can get stuff for free on your phone. It's not that hard, I promise. I think some people think like, well, the queer fantasy that I like to read, they're not going to have that at the library. They will, and if they don't, they will order it for you. You can put in a request and they will order whatever you want. So if you think they don't have it, either they do or they will.
I am a weepy fella, but this is ridiculous. 3 times I couldn't talk about my grandpa. I love you, Grandpa. So all of that is to say that, at least for me and a lot of people that mean a whole lot to me, the library has been a literal lifesaver. And even I was completely unaware of just how many things my local library offers my community.
So the first question I would ask is, as a library employee, what were some of the lesser known benefits that libraries provide to their communities? Maybe specifically things that you saw in your time as an employee that an outsider or just a patron might not initially think of as a library service.
Yeah, that's a great question. There are so many different library services depending on which library you go to. But one of the best lesser known ones at our library is that you can check out a telescope. A whole big telescope. And a lot of people didn't know that. And then when there would be like a kind of celestial event worth watching, they would all get checked out really quickly. But they come in like a really big tub, and it's really cool.
I like to
families
imagine
to come up and be like, can we check out a telescope?
Telescopes! Can you believe that? Telescopes at the library! And if you can believe it, it goes way beyond just telescopes too. Per my local library's representative, they provide everything you see on these lists. All of this is provided at low or no cost to every person in my community. It's remarkable. But wait, there's more. My library representative also confirmed additional services not even on this list, including a full-time community outreach caseworker, a full slate of localized translation services for non-English speakers, along with on-site GED preparation classes and tools. Again, all for free or otherwise cheaper than you're going to get anywhere else around here. They even have a passport office, literally a gateway to the rest of the world for everyone in my local area, right in the library. We should also take into account the people that the public library helps the most. This from John B. Horrigan at Pew Research. Americans' use of public libraries has fluctuated in recent years, and this survey shows that just under half of all those aged 16 and older say they have visited a public library or bookmobile in person in the prior year. The high watermark for library visits in center surveys is 53% in 2012 in the aftermath of the recession, when other research showed that visits to the library for job searches were more prevalent than they are today. The 2015 figure was 44% who had visited a library or bookmobile in the previous 12 months. Americans with college degrees are especially likely to have visited a public library in the past year. 59% have done so. So are women at 57%. Parents at 55%, and 16 to 29-year-olds at 55%. Additionally, 52% of Black people and 50% of Americans living in households with annual incomes of $30,000 or less have visited the library in the past year. People also go to libraries to use tech resources. In this survey, 29% of library-using Americans 16 and older said they had gone to libraries to use computers, the internet, or a public Wi-Fi network. That amounts to 23% of all Americans ages 16 and above. The library computer user figures are essentially the same as in 2015. In this context, it is worth noting that 7% of all Americans aged 16 and older have used libraries' Wi-Fi signals outside when libraries are closed. Library users who take advantage of libraries' computers and internet connections are more likely to be young, Black, female, and lower income. Specifically, compared with 29% of all library users who use computers at the library, 45% of library users between the ages of 16 and 29 used computers, the internet, or the library's Wi-Fi. 42% of Black library users used libraries' computers and internet connections. 35% of those with annual household incomes at $30,000 or less used these resources, and 33% of women use these things at the library. And while this research is from 2016, I think it still holds a lot of merit today. Open, accessible public libraries provide important, irreplaceable services to every American, but clearly and especially to the most vulnerable and marginalized among us. libraries also represent one of the last places in modern American society that can be referred to as a third place. For those unfamiliar with the term, a third place refers to a concept first put forth by sociologist Ray Oldenburg in his 1989 book, The Great Good Place. Now, I'll be the first to admit I haven't yet had a chance to read Oldenburg's book. What can I say? Somebody had it checked out the entire time I worked on this episode. But I did manage to find a ton of other information about third places, and we can actually get a great definition of them from none other than Oldenburg's own profile on the Project for Public Spaces website. Third places. Throughout his work, and particularly in his book Celebrating the Third Place, Oldenburg identifies third places as the public places on neutral ground where people can gather and interact. In contrast to the first places, home, and second places, work, third places allow people to put aside their concerns and simply enjoy the company and conversation around them. Third places host the regular, voluntary, informal, and happily anticipated gatherings of individuals beyond the realms of home and work. Oldenburg explains that beer gardens, main streets, pubs, cafes, coffee houses, post offices, and other third places are the heart of a community's social vitality. Providing the foundation for a functioning democracy, these spaces promote social equity by leveling the status of guests, providing a setting for grassroots politics, creating habits of public association, and offering psychological support to individuals and communities. Now, you may notice here that the examples provided in this list, which come from one of Oldenburg's books, well, libraries didn't make it onto this list. However, in a 2020 interview Oldenburg gave to an unnamed interviewer at Steelcase, we can see that tune of his change quite a bit. What are the most important third places today? Libraries, fellowship halls and churches, remodeled YMCAs and coffee houses that are affordable to anyone. When I traveled, I would always get off the main highway 20 to 30 minutes before I intended to stop because that would bring me into a place where things were real and local. And you sometimes regretted the food you got, but mainly you were glad it was there. So yeah, from not even making the list of third places 30 years ago to topping that same list in 2020. And that's coming from the guy who literally coined the term third place. Quite the glow up, in my opinion, and a testament to the very real, modern, lasting importance of public libraries. But essentially, Oldenburg is telling us that in order for a community to thrive, it needs open, accessible public spaces where people can gather and interact as equals in both relaxation and recreation. And ideally, these would be places where you would be asked to spend as little money as possible. Now, some people will try to tell you that the internet has done away with the need for third places entirely, since we can all just meet and gather and talk online. But ignoring how the pandemic showed us just how incorrect that is, let's hear from Oldenburg about that phenomenon as well. Is social media a new form of third place? Third places are face-to-face phenomena. The idea that electronic communication permits a virtual third place is misleading. Virtual means that something is like something else, both in essence and in effect, and that's not true in this instance. When you go to a third place, you essentially open yourself up to whoever is there, and they might be very different from you. If you don't know your neighbors, you will be suspicious. And if you are suspicious, you will act accordingly. You don't get neighborly on that basis. If you spend time with people, you're not going to hate them. It's just that simple. Furthermore, a lot of folks nowadays will tell you that your third places can actually totally be a part of your job. They can be right there at your workplace. Oldenburg obviously noticed this trend before a lot of us did. What surprised you most about third places in the last 25 years? The biggest surprise is that the business world picked up on them. Corporations used to believe that the longer they could keep each employee at the desk, the more productive they'd be. That's just been shot to pieces. Managers found out that if they let people work where they want and when they want, productivity went up. The marketplace is highly competitive, and it's important to be first with new innovations. If you get people sitting together, talking together, innovation comes quicker. And I think that's going to be the thing for business and industry for a long time. And I know what that sounds like, but don't be fooled. Don't be fooled. Oldenburg is just as quick to shoot down this whole workplace replacement for the third place just as fast as he brings it up. How beneficial are internal third places located inside workplaces? Well, does the coffee bring people together? You bet it does. but people still need to get away sometimes. A lot of friendships and good relationships can be had at work, but I don't think you can limit yourself to that. Third places out in the public realm have diverse occupants, and that's better for the development of the individual. They provide places where diversity can be far more comfortably experienced. Human beings are social animals, and happy individuals exist amidst other happy individuals. If you have a third place, you have more friends. You live longer the more friends you have. Companies would do well to encourage third places in their neighborhoods. Making sure employees have an opportunity to get away can help them hold on to good people. Can we just say for a moment how this like incredibly important interview with one of the like world's like most important sociologists when it comes to like urban planning and third places and recreation and stuff like that is hosted on a website of a company that makes high-end office furniture? Why did they get this interview? Truly though, what other space besides the public library embodies everything we just heard Oldenburg talk about? A place where anyone in the community can go with no judgments, no expectations to spend money, where they can just exist for a while, and where they can also receive access to books, technology, information, all kinds of other services all in one place, and all paid for by a community that is invested in their well-being. Let me give you an example from the real world. A lot of you may have heard of Michael Threets, the friendliest librarian on TikTok. His videos about library joy and his experiences as a librarian were a huge inspiration for this episode. Now, I wasn't able to get a hold of Michael directly since he's out there doing big stuff like being on PBS and Ms. Rachel nowadays, and I'm sure he doesn't have time for another message from a fan like me. But I like to believe he'd be okay with me highlighting the story he told on TikTok, since it shows just how uniquely important of a third place the library is.
A library grown-up waves me over, and when I get over to them, they say, "Can you please tell that kid to be a little bit quieter?" And this library kid, their volume is a little bit higher than usual for the library, but they're still being okay. So I say, I can absolutely talk with that library kid and their library grown-ups, but they're little. They're still learning how the library works. If you would like, you might actually benefit from using one of our study rooms. I could let you in there. And this library grown-up, they're a nice person. They're just sitting there studying with their library kid, and they say, that would work. Thank you so much. So I let them in there, and this whole time, the library grown-ups of that kid who's just a little bit too loud have noticed that I'm talking with this other person and that it's likely about them. And they're looking at me, they look slightly worried. So I get back over to where I am so they can see me, and I just go, have some library fun, and leave it at that. Later on, one of the library grown-ups comes back, and they tell me, thank you so much. I know that my kid was a little bit loud. I'm so sorry. We come here for visitation. We're trying. Disciplining them is still something that's hard for us. We're just trying to form that connection all over again. Thanks for letting us be here. Is it okay that we keep on coming back? And I say, absolutely. You can always come to the library. I'm so happy you see the library as a safe space, all of you, for you to come together to make that connection all over again. Thank you for being here. And families have done that throughout my library career. They'll come to the library for visitation, and I love that because it means that it is a safe space for people, families, to reconnect. Yes!
So yeah, that's the kind of thing we're fighting for. A place of radical acceptance and understanding and community, where connections and learning happen in a way that they really just can't anywhere else. A place that truly doesn't want your money and it doesn't want your labor. It simply wants your presence and your polite engagement, no matter who you are. That is what we're fighting for here. And to bring it full circle, that is what Kirk Cameron and his allies want to destroy, whether they even realize that's what they want or not. So with that in mind, let's round out this whole thing with the same thing that got us started: dunking on Kirk Cameron for the betterment of American society. So yeah, it's morning now. I had to go to bed, and it got late when I was recording that, and now I got to record it super early because this is actually the room where Jen edits. We both film in here, but Jen edits in here, so I gotta get this out quick because the clown video you saw recently, that's still being edited right now. So doing content creation is weird for a living, and especially when it's with your spouse. Also, I'm sure this is my longest video by now, and taking 2 days to do it proves that. Can y'all tell how much I care about these libraries yet? And so now, as we move into our dramatic finale, I want to start off by talking about an ironic fact I've been kind of considering as we've gone through our journey here today. Kirk Cameron is not wrong about libraries, at least in some regard. In his year-long 2023 quest to try and jam his barf book story hours into as many of our libraries as possible, Kirk did ironically reinforce a very real piece of the foundation upon which our public libraries are built. Libraries, as I think I've demonstrated here, are places for everyone in the communities that they serve. And as such, they're also places where inclusion should be the name of the game as much as absolutely humanly possible. Anywhere the public library has a chance to bring more people into its fold, well, that's a good thing, and we should all want that. And that's precisely why all those libraries let him in so many times. They did exactly what they were supposed to do, try and find ways to bring more people and perspectives into the library. That's why you got a chance to read all those books in the first place, Kirk. This is the most irritating brand of trying to have your cake and eat it too. Kirk wants to complain about how persecuted he and other Christians are when it comes to using library resources, and then simultaneously wants to grandstand about how he's being allowed to use library resources, like it's some hard-fought victory when all he had to do was fill out some light paperwork the same everyone who wants a library room has to. And you know what, Kirk? I can prove you're not being excluded, at least from my own library. 'Cause, Kirk, if you were being excluded, how did I check this out? Library sticker right there. Library sticker right there. That is As You Grow. This is Kirk's children's book, checked out from my own local public library. This is the thing that caused all of this, or well, a lot of what we've talked about today. This little children's book, it started all that beef. And you would think that with Kirk's whining and moaning that there's like no way I could have checked this out from my library. But here it is, right here. I mean, don't they want to silence you, Kurt? Aren't all the libraries trying to silence you? And yet, when I went there this was, tucked between Tuttle Twins, Tango Makes Three, and about 700 variations of Captain Underpants, as God and Uncle Sam intended. In reality, though, it turns out they have a bunch of stuff about Kirk at my library, too, that's not even this book. Whole kinds of stuff. Please, tell me again, Kirk, about all this exclusion you're facing from the libraries. Oh, and in case you're curious, As You Grow does, in fact, suck ass. Ironically, I first checked this thing out when I was starting this just because I was like, hey, let's roast this weird little Christian children's book. And I mean, don't get me wrong, I can do that with this to a degree. But to me, this little book right here is proof positive of exactly why we cannot let the free market take over our libraries. As You Grow is barely a children's book. It's barely a book at all, meeting only the barest qualifications of the term. I'm not kidding you when I tell you I have read greeting cards with more depth, plot development, and hell, words per page at some points than this. In case you're curious, Kirk actually didn't write any of the plot for this book either. None whatsoever. This book is literally just some niceties, as Kirk considers them, that he wrote about how he wants children to grow up good. It's literally just that. Telling kids to be brave, keep their head up, and worship God at all times. That's all this does. I would be shocked if it took Kirk more than an hour to write and edit this entire manuscript, and yet he still feels confident selling this thing to families for $23 a piece. Oh, but you're saying, James, it can't possibly be that bad. It's just a children's book, right? It's just a kid's book. How bad can it be? Okay. Let's go ahead and we're going to flip it up and we're going to read it, shall we? Okay. As You Grow. I'm going to read until I get grossed out. How about that? You are small, but very loved. That's an entire 2 pages of words. I want you to see that. Nice picture. That's an entire 2 pages of words on that page. Let me read it again. I don't want to take too long, but you are small, but very loved. You were made to point up to the one who loves you best. One is capitalized, the O is capitalized. God, they're being pretty obvious here. Sometimes love hurts, but love is always worth it. Nope, that's where I'm going to stop. Nope. That could go real bad. Yeah, you see my point. This is bad. The entire plot of the book, and honestly 95% of the entertainment value, comes through the work of illustrator Juan Moreno. And for his part, Moreno did an excellent job on the art. The images are fun, vibrant, and detailed, with each page turn revealing another admittedly enjoyable sprawl of characters for the eyes to enjoy. And you notice I said eyes to enjoy. It's because most of the brain has very little to do during this whole endeavor, as far as I can tell. As pleasant and lush as Moreno's artwork is, it does a very poor job of telling the actual story of what's going on here. From what I can gather with my middle-aged brain, the story represented in the art is basically as follows. There's a big tree where a bunch of anthropomorphized animals live together happily without any problems or issues, always cooperating and generally never wanting for anything at all. Then, literally out of freaking nowhere, a crowd of coyotes and hyenas attacks with some sort of poorly explained malice towards the tree animals under the leadership of a being that I can only describe as Darth Maul's fursona. The attacking army, having done a moderate amount of damage to the tree, seems to just kind of leave at some point, apparently taking no actual land or property of any kind, and otherwise just sort of making a mess of things. It reminds me of something I've seen before.
The big brain am winning again! I am the greatest! Now I am leaving Earth for no reason!
But then the animals cooperate and work together to rebuild the tree town in a way that I guess is somehow totally still capitalist and not socialist at all. Oh, and this time there's a little bit more brutalist influence on the architecture, you can see. And then after that, there's about 3 more pages where literally the animals just enjoy doing fun activities together and no other actual plot happens before the book abruptly ends. And then, like every single piece of entertainment media made for homeschooled Christian kids, there is, of course, a set of activities in the back to help drive home the moral lesson. Though here I am struggling to understand what the lesson could possibly be. And just in case you're curious, let me sum up these terrible activities that Kirk came up with for these poor kids. Make your kids carry around a bunch of stuff like pillows and stuffed animals. Hand them even more stuff until their arms are totally full. Then throw things at your children for them to catch with their arms full. Tell them then to put some stuff down and show them it's easier to catch things with less stuff in their hands. Yada, 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 something to do about sacrifice, I don't know.
The numbers don't lie, and they spell disaster for you as sacrifice!
A memory card match game, but where you just write words on paper and cut it up. The words on the paper are different feelings. And then you talk about those feelings. Oh my God, take your kids outside. And then some involved ass game involving water balloons that kids have to throw back and forth without breaking, and a really useless point system that seems totally destined to just turn into an impromptu water fight and a subsequent group trip to the prayer closet. Now, using all those context clues they taught me about in public school, I was able to pick up a little bit more on the actual story here. For example, in the activities portion, we get a name for the main villain, which is nice. It's Blackheart, by the way. It's the originality for me. Likewise, the beginning of the book highlights that this is the 8th book of the Brave Books Saga 2, meaning that it's the second run of books from the overall Freedom Island series. So there's clearly a lot of back info involved, but given what I've seen from As You Grow here, I can't imagine any of these other conservative celebrities did a much better job than this. I can only imagine every last one of these people is phoning it in for a check. I swear, I really tried to give this book the benefit of the doubt. And why, you may ask? Because I don't want to hate it so much. I want to believe that all of the children in this country, regardless of the faith and politics of their parents, I want to believe that they are still getting good, interesting books that teach them important lessons about life. And this book makes it abundantly clear how incorrect that belief is. They even have a QR code at the beginning here. Like you can scan this little code here, and it says you can learn about the story and get an introduction to the Brave universe. And while I sincerely doubt that these pressed for time, overstretched homeschool families that they're targeting with their marketing, I doubt they're going to watch this trailer and get all caught up on it. But I did. I personally took the time to go back and watch the trailer, hoping that there was more storyline involved in this, because I really didn't want to believe this whole thing was as cynical as it looked. And yet that trailer that supposedly tells all the backstory you need to know, it's all of about 90 seconds long. The first minute is some deep voice narrator talking vaguely about stuff that sounds kind of fantasy-ish, while pretty pictures go by telling no more of the story than I already knew. And the last 30 seconds are, I kid you not, just a commercial for the book line again. So yeah, this piece of garbage, at least to me, is absolute proof as to why we have to defend our public, tax-supported libraries at all costs. Done with it. When these rich jerks tell you that they can do it better than the staff at your local public library, that Jeff Bezos can somehow replace them all with robots and it would benefit you somehow, you remember those awful books and tremble. Capitalism doesn't encourage excellence and innovation. It breeds copycat trash and cynical marketing like this. If Kirk and his cronies had their way, they would shutter your libraries and fill that void with their own half-hearted, barely literary swill. But I mean, only after you'd paid the nominal fee, of course, right? For-profit books marketed directly to paying parents by giant corporations simply looking to generate the most revenue at the lowest cost and who give not a damn for the world around them or the children they claim they want to educate. Focusing hard on things like how to sell long-term subscriptions to politicized parents, and leaving less profitable concerns like the welfare of our youth or, hell, even their entertainment as just mere afterthoughts. I want to make it clear. This is what they want to replace your libraries with.
Just a few blocks away, there was looting underway. 500%.
And in turn, these are the important moments and experiences that they want to expel from the library in order to achieve their goals.
The reason this is personal for me is not only because I work at libraries, but because I love libraries and because libraries have helped me since I was a kid. A story that I told at the press conference our union held about the book ban is that when I was 13, I checked out a couple young adult fiction books about trans people. And it was really the first time I had heard hardly anything about trans people. It was the first time I'd read books about trans people, certainly. I was able to get those books from the library in probably 2009, different time politically. Those books were huge for me. So sort of the point is, like, I might not be here if I hadn't gotten those. Like, those were certainly a huge help to me. And that's exactly the kind of thing that they're trying to prevent. They don't want trans people, among other identities, to be acknowledged in an official way at an institution like the public library. They don't want us to see ourselves reflected in the literary canon, I guess.
And yet, despite all these attacks from Kirk, our American libraries truly responded in the most Christ-like way I can possibly imagine by fully turning the other cheek. They gave Kirk the platform he wanted. They put his books on the shelves. Libraries have consistently made sure to include Kirk and people like him and all of their ideas in the conversation. And it is precisely that goodwill that Kirk and his awful allies manipulated as part of this larger, cold-hearted movement we've discussed today. Because at least in my opinion, a politically charged children's event built on regressive views and for-profit books, that doesn't really belong in the library. I know, I said libraries should be as inclusive as possible, and maybe I'm a bit of a hypocrite for saying that Kirk and his Brave Books Hours are one of the few things that shouldn't be included in the library. But you know what? Kirk's been doing whataboutism this whole episode. Why don't I get in on the action a little bit? And you want to know what I think is hypocritical? Telling kids to go read at their libraries is a cheap PR stunt when you're an 80s teen heartthrob before crapping on those very same libraries when you're an old washed-up has-been who needs more clout. Okay, I'm sitting back down because I had a whole thing planned. I was going to yell at the poster back here, but that was too short to make it easy. I also had a lot. So I'm just going to talk directly into the camera. We're going to do it this way. Because I think that while today we have demonstrated that libraries truly are for everyone in their communities, they are most importantly a space for those whom our society has traditionally not left space. And that is more important than making people like Kirk over here, who have every advantage in the world, feel comfortable in their privilege. Libraries are most importantly for young people, people of color, women, old people, young people, poor people, disabled people of any kind. And again, for everyone else in our society that usually does not have space left available for them. Libraries are not a place for you to flex your bigotry and bad prose in front of everyone without recourse. They aren't a place to turn a profit, and they aren't a place where your money and your influence will award you any special favors. You're thinking of a church, Kirk. And I bet that in every one of those communities you invaded, Kirk, there were 10 or more churches willing to bend over backwards to give you a free and friendly space for your event. Hell, Kirk, the churches probably had better equipment and more space, too. They're usually better funded than our libraries, aren't they? But you didn't want that, did you, Kirk? Because going to church doesn't quite make it as fun to whine about gay people and taxes, does it? And more importantly, your church doesn't afford you the opportunity to make all those people you hate uncomfortable in a space specifically designed to be one of safety and peace for them. Kirk Cameron and the people he has aligned himself with, they want to replace the core of equality and opportunity at the heart of the public library with the same awful, toxic brand of evangelical conservative capitalism they inject into every other part of our society. Honestly, I'd like to believe that Kirk maybe doesn't even realize what he's being a part of here. Like a lot of modern American Christians, he may unfortunately just be getting so worked up about his rights that he fails to see anything else around him. It's a very forest for the trees type of situation. Like, Kirk, even if you believe that you're fighting for your rights as a Christian American, you need to be mature about this. As a Christian with all that money and power and influence, you have plenty of spaces to read your books, to tell your stories, and to teach your lessons. And you have an entire internet to sell your wares on, too. But for a lot of people, a lot of causes, and a lot of ideas, the American Public Library is the last place they have left. And the library is a space for those people and those ideas first. And I think it's very immature of you to try and bully your way into these spaces over and over and over when you were not wanted and you never needed them in the first place. And while it may help you sleep at night to think that you're just defending your rights and not stepping on everyone else's, you just have to recognize that that's not true. Whether you like it or not, Kirk, you are still right now in league with the book banners, the art burners, and the library closers. You're not a teenager anymore. Stop acting like it. Okay, I guess, well, that one's a teenager, but this one, you're not a teenager out here. This is very confusing. Anyway, honestly, I assume you lovely viewers are probably pretty well on my side at this point, or at least I like to believe I've made my point pretty clear to all of you. But if not, Dakota also put it really, really well too.
So from your perspective as having, not only, worked in the library, but also been someone who was a very active library patron, who the library has meant a lot of different things to, why would you say it's so important to keep our libraries free and public and neutral rather than going back to the old Ben Franklin subscription model or just letting Amazon take the whole system over?
Libraries have to be free because information has to be free. We think that with the internet now, everything is free, but it's not. Things are paywalled. You were talking about your New York Times subscription. Research studies and things are paywalled too. Like, it is not all information is free on the internet. Not legally free, certainly. And there's something to be said for physical materials as well. Not everyone has a computer or a phone. And that's a big gap that libraries fill, is the technology gap. That's probably the number one service used at most public libraries, I would say, is the computers. Even talking about access to the internet being free, the public library is the one who gets you access to the internet for free. These things have to be free for there to be the possibility of us not living in a George Orwell 1984 hellscape.
And so now, I hope I have shown you both just how important our American public libraries are, and also the scope of the movement trying to attack them. Defending our libraries is so much more than just defending a place with books and computers and free Wi-Fi, although that's the thing we should be defending all on its own. But truly, defending the library is taking a stand against censorship in all its forms. It is decisive social action against income inequality that is both tangible and effective. It's a commitment to leaving space for our society's most vulnerable, even if they can't pay for it. I can't even remember, but I think I said it before. Public libraries are our commitment to life, liberty, and the pursuit of happiness for every American citizen made manifest. And if we can't work together to fund something as pure and perfect as the public library, without question or limitation, then everything good about our nation falls apart. So, what maybe can we do about it? Well, let's turn to our library expert one more time and see what she thinks about how we can all help our libraries and the people that staff them.
How would you say, again, having worked in this setting, especially through so much, tumult as you did, between unionization and all the politics surrounding Missouri libraries, how would you say that our viewers could best or most effectively support their own local libraries if they have them?
Use them. That's the best way to support the public library, is use the public library in any way that suits you. Use your public library, get involved, go to events, talk to library workers. If your library workers are forming a union, support their union. If your library has a board of directors, see if you can get on the board of directors. These are all big things, but using the library really is a way that you can keep your library running. So that's the number one thing.
So yeah, like always, the library doesn't ask for your money or your labor. Instead, it only asks for your participation and your engagement. The absolute best thing you can do for your local library is to go there and do stuff. Get a library card. Make your friends get library cards. The Reverend didn't have a library card before this episode, and now she does. Find out more about all the services and programs your library offers and participate if possible. And make sure to go to the website. Librarians are usually pretty good at keeping things up to date. Tell other folks about how important the library is. Consider the library space for your next community event. And if you've never held a community event, think of one and then do it at the library. Support Drag Story Hour and other progressive events at your library. Even if you can't go, you can always say nice things and tell the parents in your life. And if you can't go to the library, well, try and make sure to use their online resources whenever applicable to your life. All of this stuff, it's the type of things that libraries can keep track of, and when it comes time to appeal for funding, they can use that to show just how much people are taking advantage of their services, and oftentimes that can lead to increased library funding. Unfortunately, we still live in a capitalist society, and the more value these libraries can demonstrate, the more likely their communities are to keep and fund them. Likewise, try always to only vote for politicians and causes that are good for the library or that support the library, and avoid voting for things that would cause problems or harm for the library. Being extra careful to avoid those defunding measures we talked about earlier, because they'll sneak those up on you and you won't even know you're voting for them. And remember, taxes aren't the enemy. They're a good thing. We use those to build stuff for everyone. Remember, Surfshark ads are for YouTube videos, but libraries need tax revenue. And by the way, thank you so much to Surfshark for sponsoring this video. And while I really hope this video has encouraged you to take a step away from social media and instead go out into the world and visit your library, but you can, of course, also tune in to great pro-library, pro-literacy creators like some of the people we've referenced and talked about here today. But I mean, check them out at the library if you can. Free Wi-Fi, dude! And sadly, I know that a lot of you still probably in 2024 do not have close access to a solid, well-funded public library. It's a tragedy, and it's one I don't necessarily know how to solve, and I guess all I can say at this point is we gotta keep fighting for people like you. Everyone should have a good library nearby. I mean, yeah, you can rally and petition your people in Congress. You can try and advance legislation. You can do stuff like that, but it's hard and it will take a long time. It would be worth it. And as we've seen in this episode, a lot of communities have rallied together a lot of times in this country to build their libraries. Maybe yours is next. But honestly, I don't want to overload anyone right now with too much homework. That's not in the spirit of the library. Instead, just try to take a trip to the closest one you can, when you can. Get your card or update it if it's out of date, and do your best to use the library when you can. And if you do that, that'll be the kick-ass thing you do this weekend, I tell you. Oh, and
turn your books in on time. It's a little dusty because I dropped it on the floor there, but it's fine, I swear. Turn your books in on time. And speaking of which, I got to get this one back to the library. See y'all next time.
The funniest moment that happened to me at the library was I would try and wear like fun earrings to like, I'd try and talk to kids that came up to the front desk, you know, and like some of them don't want to talk, but I would always try and have like a fun earring to maybe, you know, start them off. And I had these shark earrings that looked like there were sharks like biting my ears. So this girl, probably 4 or 5 years old, had a bunch of like dinosaur books. And I was like, oh, you like dinosaurs? Do you like sharks too? Because I've got these shark earrings. And I think she was concerned that there were actually sharks biting my ears. And she had a mask on, and I just saw her like eyes go wide and like horror. And I was like, no, they're not real. They're just earrings, you know? So I accidentally scared her with my shark earrings, but.